Hey guys, tonight we journey through the misty trails of Sinaloa, where heat clings to the skin like old sins and silence is currency. We're diving into the life of a man who built an empire from shadows, a man you'll never find on a smartphone screen or prison registry. His name is Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the ghost who never got caught. He's still out there, probably listening closer than you'd think. Picture this: the dry crunch of gravel under worn boots, a burro's slow clip-clop over the Sierra Madre foothills, and a boy who learns early that money doesn't whisper. It rustles, sweats, and sometimes bleeds. El Mayo didn't arrive with fireworks. He crept in through a side door no one saw open. And you? You probably wouldn't last a week in the heat, dust, and betrayal that shaped his path. His story isn't a shootout, it's a slow simmer. And tonight, we're following that long, dusty trail from farm fields to criminal folklore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and your local time in the comments. I love seeing how far this quiet little channel travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun rises lazily over the hills of Badiraguato, spilling gold onto cracked earth. It's the kind of dawn that's too still to be innocent. Young Ismael walks beside a slow, patient donkey, burlap sacks swinging gently with each step. Inside, sometimes it's corn, sometimes it's raw opium. He doesn't ask, he doesn't care. He just walks. There's no fanfare, no birthright prophecy. Just another brown-eyed boy from the mountains, hardened early by long distances and the weight of whatever he's carrying. By the time he's 12, his feet know the valleys like fingerprints. By 15, he's been through more routine inspections than most grown men: soldiers, federales, local police. Some smile, some don't. All of them take a cut. It teaches him something early. In this game, movement is permission. Stillness is suspicion. The region is unforgiving. Known as part of Mexico's Golden Triangle, Sinaloa is fertile for two things: agriculture and crime. And in Badiraguato, they're often the same thing. Families grow poppies the way others raise pigs or maize. For many, there's no distinction between farming and trafficking. It's just supply and demand. The crop rotates, the bills get paid. El Mayo grows up surrounded by uncles and cousins who've mastered this rhythm. He watches quietly, doesn't speak more than needed. He has the kind of silence that makes adults nervous, the kind that studies, memorizes, outlasts. When other boys play cards or flirt with girls, Ismael watches Border Patrol schedules. He learns when helicopters fly. He tracks the rainy season's effect on dirt roads. He understands early that the mountains aren't obstacles. They're camouflage. In town, everyone knows him. Not because he talks, but because he doesn't. That calm gait, that polite nod, that absence of spectacle. Even as a teenager, El Mayo has the aura of someone with no wasted motion. One local story, half rumor, half gospel, tells of a time a federale tried to shake him down during a routine stop. Ismael, maybe 17 then, stood still while the soldier patted down his burro. Found nothing. Smirked. Told him to go. The next morning, that same federale was transferred. No one knows why. No one asks. And El Mayo? He kept walking. Many people still think that his early discretion wasn't genius. It was fear. A boy too shy, too cautious. But looking back, it reads differently. Like instinct. Like chess. Because when your environment breathes with corruption, the smartest player isn't the loudest one. It's the one who doesn't have to play twice. He learns the back trails first. Paths where boots leave no prints and satellite signals fade into tree cover. Some say he could cross from Sinaloa to Durango, blindfolded by the time he was 20. Others believe he never once crossed without knowing exactly who watched him on the other end. Either way, he never slips. One day, he helps an older cousin with a delivery run. 3 burlap sacks and a handshake to a man in a green pickup. No names exchanged. No words either, really. Just a nod, a payment, and a drive away. El Mayo doesn't blink. He doesn't write anything down. He never will. If you passed him on that road back then, you wouldn't notice him. That's the point. He isn't the kind of boy who picks fights or lights cigars. He's the kind who finishes the work, washes his hands, and tends to his cattle like it was just another morning. And here's the thing, he still does. Decades later, people will say El Mayo never left the countryside, that even as billions flowed through his channels, he remained a man of the mountains. Never a penthouse, never a gold chain, just the same wide-brimmed hat, the same soft voice, and the same preference for back roads over bulletproof SUVs. It's not romanticism, it's strategy. Because in Sinaloa, legends that shine too brightly tend to burn fast. But ghosts last. The boy with the burro doesn't vanish. He just changes shape. By the time he's in his early 20s, Ismael Zambada has outgrown the role of the humble courier. His walks grow longer, his routes more complex. The names he hears whispered around fires become louder. Gallardo, Caro Quintero, Fonseca Carrillo. He listens, he learns, and more importantly, he remembers who moves what, where, and how. There's no diploma in the narcotics trade, no orientation day, no training manual. But El Mayo attends the only school that matters, the Sierras. In the rugged mountains between Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, survival is the curriculum. And logistics? That's his major. He's not flashy. He doesn't come to meetings with a gold watch or a bodyguard. He brings maps, hand-drawn ones, etched in dirt with a stick, or sketched onto napkins during late-night planning. They're not beautiful, but they're accurate. He knows how long a donkey can carry wet poppy sap before it spoils. He calculates how far a man can hike with 40 kilos of cargo before collapsing. He doesn't just move product, he moves people. Efficiently, quietly, repeatedly. And this is where he begins to build a reputation, not as a gunman, but as a thinker. Many people still think that drug empires are forged by bullets and fear. That may be true for some, but not for El Mayo. His empire is shaped by margins, by planning, by making sure that this shipment crosses the ravine before the army patrol loops back, that mule's limp is factored into the time schedule, and that every bribe along the way is the correct amount. No more, no less. One of the first things he notices is how often deals collapse because of ego. A younger trafficker might show off a new car or steal a rival's girlfriend. That kind of drama gets you killed. El Mayo? He doesn't drive anything new. He doesn't flirt. He simply pays his people on time and expects them to show up early. If they don't, they're replaced, not punished. He doesn't waste emotion. There's no speech. Just a quiet nod, and someone else carries the next bag. By the late 1970s, Ismael is a known presence in local trafficking circles. He's not a boss, not yet, But he's the man you call when your shipment is stuck in the hills and your usual route just got raided. He has alternate paths, alternate drivers, even alternate names. It's not uncommon for a load to disappear in Durango and reappear, fully intact, across the U.S. border days later. Thanks to him, there's one incident, half truth and half memory, told by a former associate decades later. A rival crew had lost a shipment, 500,000 in raw opium, somewhere in the Sierra Madre. Panic set in. Fingers were pointed. Accusations flew. El Mayo, not even officially involved, rode into their camp uninvited. He said nothing, just looked at the map, pointed to a dry stream bed near a gulch, sent 2 men. 4 hours later, they came back with the cargo, intact. He didn't take payment. He just left. That's when people started calling him El Mayo, not Ismael, not Zambada, just Mayo. A name that rolled off the tongue like a weather forecast, inevitable, uncontrollable, and utterly neutral. His rise isn't flashy, but it's felt. And as the old guards of the Guadalajara cartel begin to take notice, so do the federales. But here's the thing. They can't pin anything on him. Not because he's squeaky clean, but because he's invisible. He doesn't sign papers. He doesn't leave fingerprints. He doesn't make phone calls. If you want to speak to him, you ask 3 people. Wait 2 weeks. And maybe, a man will arrive at your door and say, "Walk with me." It's this discretion that makes him invaluable to Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the so-called godfather of Mexican drug trafficking. Gallardo runs the Guadalajara cartel like a boardroom, with territories, commissions, and agreed-upon routes. He needs men like El Mayo, not to fight, but to organize. And organize he does. Throughout the early 1980s, El Mayo becomes the unofficial postmaster of the Golden Triangle. He doesn't just move opium anymore. He's dabbling in marijuana, experimenting with crude cocaine routes, and, more importantly, building a web of reliable human assets. Mule drivers, lookouts, corrupt officials, even mechanics. If you touch a shipment between Culiacan and the U.S. border, odds are you're on his list. Still, he stays rural. He refuses city life. While others buy mansions in Guadalajara or Mexico City, he lives near the fields, sleeps in humble ranchos, eats where his workers eat. It's not charity. It's insulation. No flashing neon signs. No narco corridos written about him. Just dust, boots, and silence. And it works. One DEA officer would later say, "We always knew of him, but we never saw him. It was like hunting a rumor. There's something inherently eerie about that kind of absence. You don't notice him enter. You only realize later that things are cleaner, more efficient. The money arrives faster. The shipments move safer. The bribes go unchallenged. That's El Mayo. He doesn't take the spotlight. He removes obstacles. Do you remember the boy with the burro? He's still there, under layers of experience, strategy, and smuggled millions. Still quiet, still careful, still walking his routes. But now the maps are mental and the stakes are global. He doesn't want to be king. He wants to be inevitable. And the hills of Sinaloa are happy to keep his secrets. He doesn't blink when the first man dies. It's not the sort of detail that enters the newspapers, and it certainly doesn't appear in any official records. But somewhere along the line, one of El Mayo's earliest shipments doesn't arrive, not because it was intercepted, but because the courier made a side deal, thought he could pinch a few ounces, thought no one would notice. They did. Or rather, El Mayo did. There's no dramatic retaliation, no cartel banner, No flaming car. The man simply stops appearing at his usual watering hole in Badiraguado. His house sits quiet. His family says he left for the U.S. No one believes it, but no one investigates either. And El Mayo? He's back in the mountains by dusk, as if nothing ever happened. That was his first move in a new phase, no longer just a mule or coordinator. Now, he's a trusted steward of product, with eyes on the bigger picture. There's always someone watching the valleys, always someone counting the days between deliveries. And the name El Mayo starts showing up more frequently in whispered conversations under low candlelight. The Golden Triangle, so called for its overlapping borders of Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua, isn't governed by flags or laws. It answers to terrain, weather, and quiet power. And by the early 1980s, Ismael Zambada has mastered all three. It's during this time that he gets pulled deeper into a growing network, one that will soon expand far beyond opium fields and donkey trails. The Guadalajara Cartel, under the cunning eye of Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, begins organizing what had once been a chaotic scattering of traffickers into a structured syndicate. Routes are carved, responsibilities assigned, payments tracked. The business is becoming a business, and El Mayo is exactly the kind of ghost you want managing your logistics. Many people still think that this stage in his life was his peak, his great contribution to the narcotics empire. But they're wrong. This was just his apprenticeship, because while other traffickers of the time, people like Caro Quintero and Fonseca Carrillo, drew attention with lavish parties, tigers on leashes, and diamond-plated pistols, El Mayo stayed in the hills, didn't show up to the meetings unless personally requested, didn't wear designer boots, wore the same hat, the same blank expression, the same quiet tone of voice that barely rose above a whisper. He didn't act like a criminal, he acted like a farmer, and in that distinction lay his shield. One American agent operating in the region during those years later described him as unreadable, said that talking to El Mayo was like speaking into a canyon. Your words went in, but you never quite heard them come back. Others recalled his hospitality, offering sweet coffee, bread, a place to sit, then nodding politely while saying almost nothing. Yet he remembers everything. Dates, times, names, routes. It's all in his head. He doesn't carry notebooks. He doesn't make calls from his home. When he needs to coordinate, he walks, or someone walks for him. Even then, orders are rarely explicit. A gesture, a location scribbled on a matchbox, a red thread tied around a cigar. He's not paranoid, he's surgical. And this precision begins paying off. By the mid-1980s, shipments managed by El Mayo are arriving in the U.S. at astonishing rates. Arizona, California, Texas, all via clandestine paths he engineers personally. He becomes known not only for reliability, but for consistency. His shipments don't vary in size. They don't arrive early or late. They hit their mark every time. One DEA report from 1985 notes a curiously stable channel of narcotics supply operating between northern Sinaloa and Sonora. They attribute it to luck. Others suspect a mole. No one names El Mayo, but within the cartel, they know. It's around this time that Felix Gallardo, El Padrino, pulls him in closer. No official rank, no seat at the head table. But he's allowed to listen, to advise, to offer feedback when a new route is proposed or a new bribe negotiated. And when the infamous meeting happens in Acapulco, where the cartel's bosses divide up the entire country into operational plazas, El Mayo's name is scribbled next to Sinaloa, not as a boss, but as the guy who makes sure it all works. Do you remember the first tunnel he walked through? His childhood trail between two hills near La Tuna? That memory stays with him, shapes the way he approaches every deal. Quiet, uninterrupted, undetected. He believes that success lies not in domination, but in invisibility. It's during this time that he begins cultivating his family's involvement. His younger brothers, a nephew, quiet, polite, observant, just like him. He teaches them that loyalty is non-negotiable and that discretion is gold. He doesn't raise soldiers. He raises shadows. At the same time, federal corruption in Mexico is reaching a grotesque apex. Entire police forces are on payroll. Judges rule without reading. Politicians speak in rehearsed ambiguity. And El Mayo sees all of it, not with outrage, but with opportunity. The system, he realizes, isn't broken. It's just badly priced. And so he pays. Always quietly. Always in cash. Not stacks of dollars. Just enough. A few thousand pesos tucked in a newspaper. A cow delivered to a rural commandante's cousin. A wedding paid for. A hospital bill erased. That's how you buy silence in Sinaloa. Not with stacks, but with small mercies. There's one story told in quiet tones in the hills outside Culiacan. A young federal agent is dispatched to investigate local trafficking rumors. He's new, earnest. He asks questions, writes notes, seems determined. But one evening, a man, older, calm, dressed like a farmer, invites him for coffee. No threats, no bribes, just talk. The agent leaves the next morning. Files nothing. Requests a transfer 2 weeks later. El Mayo's voice isn't loud, but apparently it sticks. When a man survives long enough in the drug world without so much as a mugshot, people stop asking who he is. They start asking how he is. By the late 1980s, Ismael El Mayo Zambada is no longer the man behind the mules. He's the man behind the men who manage the mules. And while some are building reputations on flamboyance and brutality, Mayo's name drifts through the cartel's corridors like a draft. Always felt, never seen. This is the era when Mexico's narcotics world becomes a chessboard. As the Guadalajara cartel fractures, thanks in part to the fallout from the DEA agent Kiki Camarena's murder in 1985, power doesn't vanish. It spreads. The plazas, once unified, begin to splinter. Tijuana, Juarez, Sinaloa, all sharpen their knives. Many people still think that the collapse of Guadalajara was the start of chaos. But for El Mayo, it's the moment the game opens. Because when borders blur and bosses fight, supply lines suffer. And guess who's still able to move product on time, every time, without so much as a whisper? Yeah, him. He doesn't make speeches. He doesn't declare independence. He just keeps the trucks running, the payments smooth, and the foot soldiers oddly loyal for someone they barely meet in person. And while others fumble for territory or revenge, he focuses on rules. His own. One of those rules. No unnecessary blood. Not because he's merciful, but because gunfire draws satellites, paperwork, and cameras. And El Mayo's brand depends on being forgettable. He tells his people, leave a body, expect a checkpoint. Leave no body, move another ton. It's crude, it's cold, it's effective. At this time, Mexico is shifting. Carlos Salinas de Gortari's presidency in 1988 ushers in reforms, at least on paper. But behind closed doors, drug money is inflating everything from elections to city planning. Even infrastructure projects rumble forward on foundations soaked in cartel payments. El Mayo watches, and quietly he invests. Not in stocks or real estate, but in people. Police chiefs, port authorities, mayors. Sometimes he pays them. Sometimes he marries into their families. Either way, loyalty becomes a two-way street paved with plausible deniability. One urban legend, more persistent than verified, claims that during a high-level army operation in Durango, El Mayo drove straight through the checkpoint dressed as a milkman, nodding politely at a colonel who saluted him back. The real joke? He was delivering milk. A dozen cartons, all hiding 1.5 kilos of heroin wrapped in wax paper beneath a false bottom. Classic Mayo. No flash, just flow. He doesn't believe in big scores. He believes in constant movement, and in that movement, alliances shift. Around this time, he begins working more closely with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, a brash, younger trafficker with a taste for tunnels and headlines. They're opposites in temperament, but perfect in tandem. Chapo builds, Mayo roots. Chapo dreams big. Mayo makes sure the phone bills are paid on time. Together, they carve out the foundation of what will become the Sinaloa Cartel. But not as equal kings. Chapo takes the spotlight, the narco corridos, the notoriety. Mayo stays in the shadows, the one man Chapo is rumored to respect without question. Do you remember the way he walked, steady, careful, as if timing every footstep with the rhythm of the wind? That never changes. Even now, with millions flowing and U.S. agencies scrambling to track shipments, he walks the same. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with a driver who doesn't know his name. This is also the period where El Mayo starts to design a system, not just a network. He builds redundancies. If one driver is arrested, there's another. If one airstrip is closed, a backup waits 20 miles away. Every role is replaceable, except his. He also begins embedding tech into his world. Not flashy gadgets, but two-way radios, encrypted walkie-talkies, disposable burner phones. He doesn't trust cell towers, never will, but he knows the value of frequency hopping and signal jamming. He trains his runners not just in routes, but in listening. He even rotates their walking shoes so their footprints change. That's the level, and yet, in the middle of all this hyper-efficiency, he still pretends to be ordinary. He hosts barbecues, shows up at baptisms, gives to the local church. Locals see him as a patron, not a criminal. He gives advice about irrigation, pays for school repairs. And once, when a flood washed out a bridge near his childhood town, he rebuilt it faster than the government could even file the report. To the people of Sinaloa, he's not a kingpin. He's ours. That's how they say it, with quiet pride, as if they know something the world never will. But of course, someone does notice. By the early 1990s, El Mayo's name appears in DEA briefings, not prominently, just a footnote, a suspected coordinator, a logistical asset, no photo, no voice recording, no known alias, just a name and a question mark. The agents know something big is happening in the mountains, but the only trail they have is a nickname whispered by arrested drivers and scribbled onto the corner of seized maps. Mayo. Still, they can't pin him. He doesn't attend meetings, doesn't wire money, doesn't show up in tapped calls. Even when rivals start flipping, providing testimony, locations, even Polaroids, El Mayo stays a ghost. Many people still think that during this period, he must have made a critical mistake, that someone this efficient would eventually trip on something. But no mistake comes, no photograph surfaces, no trusted lieutenant turns. What does surface is infrastructure. Runways, stash houses, border tunnels, all connected not by bloodlines or cartel politics, but by one thing, timing. routes too precise to be random, deliveries too perfect to be luck. And in the middle of this spiderweb sits El Mayo, sipping his coffee from a chipped mug, while the world around him tries to draw his silhouette from dust. The first time El Mayo meets Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, El Padrino, it isn't in a mansion or a smoky boardroom. It's in a field, a simple exchange, nothing grand. The older man, already Mexico's most powerful trafficker by then, stands beside a black jeep, nodding faintly as the younger, leaner Zambada steps forward with his usual stillness. No bowing, no swagger. Just a mutual study, two predators sniffing the wind. Gallardo speaks first. Something vague, perhaps about the harvest or shipments needing protection. El Mayo says almost nothing. Just listens. Responds with a number, a route, a reassurance. That day, an invisible contract is signed, not with ink, but with silence. Gallardo sees what most miss, that behind the mild manner of this mountain man is a mind like a switchblade. El Mayo is brought into the fold, but never made the center. That suits him. He doesn't want applause. He wants access. And under Gallardo's cartel, the Guadalajara cartel, then the single most powerful crime syndicate in the country, he gets it. Routes, contacts, import systems, planes. But above all, structure. This is where he studies, learns what makes an empire breathe. Gallardo runs his organization like a stock market. Risk is measured, profit is shared, plazas are allocated. Sinaloa, Tijuana, Juarez, divided like departments in a multinational corporation. El Mayo watches, takes notes without taking notes, learns who talks too much, who drinks too heavily, who overextends with border bribes. He becomes Gallardo's quietest lieutenant, the one who never demands credit, but whose trucks arrive early and loaded. And behind all this, the U.S. is waking up. In 1985, DEA agent Kiki Camarena is kidnapped, tortured, and killed. The fallout is volcanic. The American government launches Operation Leyenda, the largest DEA investigation in history, and Gallardo becomes their primary target. Cartel members flee, rearrange alliances, tensions rise. But El Mayo? He doesn't run, he adapts. Many people still think that Gallardo's arrest in 1989 fractured everything. And that's partly true. But El Mayo saw it coming. He'd watched Gallardo centralize too tightly, draw too much heat, trust too many flashy enforcers. And when the time came, he didn't stand beside his boss. He stepped back. The result? While others were rounded up, El Mayo simply shifted. He doesn't see power as something to be grabbed. He sees it like air pressure. Distribute it well, and it moves for you. Concentrate it too tightly, and it explodes. With Gallardo gone, there's a power vacuum. Every plaza wants independence, and in Sinaloa, a new coalition begins to rise, built on trust between former allies and friends from the Sierras. This is where El Mayo and Joaquin El Chapo Guzman move from shadow players to architects. Along with figures like Héctor El Güero Palma, they begin to stitch together a loose but lethal alliance that will one day become the Sinaloa Cartel. But even within this new framework, El Mayo stays the same. While Chapo builds tunnels and courts headlines, Mayo quietly reinforces the supply lines, bribery pipelines, and rural loyalty networks that keep the whole thing running. One story from a trafficker who defected paints the picture clearly. Chapo would promise the cocaine. Mayo would deliver it. On time. Every time. Chapo got the song lyrics. Mayo got the retirement plans. And it's not just drugs anymore. Under El Mayo's silent eye, operations expand to human trafficking, arms, counterfeit goods, and extortion rackets. But everything runs on the principle of minimal disruption. If a shipment draws attention, it's rerouted. If a police chief gets greedy, he's paid or replaced. If a route becomes too hot, it goes cold for 6 months. The man's ability to wait is his most dangerous skill. Do you remember the boy beside the burro? He never left. He just learned to think 10 steps ahead. Some DEA agents joke that Mayo is the world's most punctual criminal. He doesn't move tons when it's flashy. He moves ounces constantly, invisibly. Every month, the numbers add up. And because he never touches the product himself, never signs a document, never answers a call, the law always arrives just a little too late. By the early 1990s, while rivals are hunted or imprisoned, Mayo is refining something unique, a decentralized cartel. No single leader, no single base, a moving, morphing system. One cell may traffic drugs through Baja, another through Chihuahua. If one falls, the rest remain intact. Like a hydra, but quieter. He communicates in layers. Orders pass through 5 people before being acted on. Messages are sometimes written, sometimes verbal, sometimes never delivered at all, because his lieutenants already know what he'd decide. It's not micromanagement, it's indoctrination. And yet, even as he builds this empire, locals in his hometown see a different man. They remember him at funerals, speaking softly, sometimes even weeping. They remember him helping rebuild a school that the government abandoned. They remember sacks of food appearing during droughts, paid for by no one, yet always arriving from the same dirt road. This duality defines him. To the DEA, he's a top-tier narco. To the mountains, he's the one who kept the lights on when no one else did. There's one more rule he lives by. Never betray your origin. He doesn't move to Miami, doesn't buy a villa in Spain. He stays near his birthplace, not for sentiment, but for safety. He knows every ridge, every canyon, every rainfall pattern. If the military comes, he hears it in the birds before the engines. If a stranger arrives, he knows by the second turn of their tires. By now, his personal security is less about guns and more about geography. His compounds are not fortresses, they're fields. A corn patch, a cow pen, a barn that hides radio relays beneath hay bales. If you fly a drone over it, it looks like a homestead. If you walk in, you disappear. Many people still think that he must live in constant fear, but those who've seen him say otherwise. He laughs easily, sleeps well, trusts his dogs more than most humans, and every Sunday, they say, he walks alone to a ridge above Badiraguato and just looks. No guards, no drone shields, just a man with a hat and an empire hidden beneath his silence. He never raises his voice. That's something people always repeat. Those few who claim to have met El Mayo in person. Even in moments of tension, when a shipment is missing or a soldier crosses a line, he speaks in the same calm, measured tone. No yelling, no threats, just a pause, maybe a slow exhale, and a sentence that carries the weight of a verdict. And that silence? It terrifies more than any bullet. By the early 1990s, El Mayo is operating at a level few can comprehend. He isn't just moving product across borders, he's engineering trust across fractured alliances. The Guadalajara cartel is long gone. What's left is a landscape of egos and vendettas, with splinter groups rising and falling like unstable scaffolding, but not his. His corner of the business isn't flashy, but it never falters. Even when plazas are overrun, bosses arrested, or lieutenants assassinated, El Mayo's routes keep flowing. Cocaine from Colombia, methamphetamine labs in Sinaloa, Marijuana farms nestled under palm leaves, all moving like clockwork. He doesn't chase headlines, he chases timing. Many people still think that the drug war in the 1990s was a firefight. In reality, it was logistics. And El Mayo, he was the silent general, redrawing maps before the other side even sharpened a pencil. One moment that defines this era happens in 1993, when Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is arrested in Guatemala. For many in the newly forming Sinaloa cartel, this is a shock. Chapo had been a bold partner, aggressive and ambitious. With him gone, there's uncertainty, but not for Mayo. He doesn't scramble, doesn't lash out. He just recalibrates, keeps everything moving, makes a few quiet calls, reroutes some key shipments, buys a little more time from a judge here, a military commander there. And that's when people notice. Nothing changes. The Sinaloa cartel, if anything, grows smoother, less impulsive, more exact. It's as if El Mayo had been the real engine all along, just letting Chapo flash the headlines while he held the map. Do you remember the tunnels El Chapo loved? The ones that dropped under walls and popped up in Phoenix basements? Those weren't El Mayo's style. He admired the cleverness, but he preferred the back roads, the rivers, the fake delivery trucks with double walls and custom ventilation. Simpler, quieter, more sustainable. Around this time, El Mayo starts shifting more of his operation into Central America. Not to move there, he never truly leaves Sinaloa, but to stretch his fingers. Honduras, Guatemala, Panama. He builds networks that supply him with raw product before it even reaches the Mexican border. By the time most traffickers are arguing about pricing, Mayo already owns the pipeline, and yet he still doesn't advertise. You won't find photos of him flashing signs. No Rolexes, no armored convoys. Just him, riding in a beat-up pickup with one other man and 2 dogs in the back. There's a story, often repeated by farmers in the Sierra Madre. They say a convoy of soldiers came through one afternoon, looking for a known trafficker. They checked houses, burned a few fields, even detained an old man. Then one soldier, exhausted, asked a local, "Where's El Mayo?" The man pointed at a hill. "He passed by you already. 2 hours ago. Waved." You waved back. It's impossible to verify, but it fits. He survives because he refuses to play the part. He doesn't fall into the traps of empire building. No monuments, no mistresses turned mayors, just layers of anonymity. When his name is mentioned, it's always after the deal, never during, and he trusts no one too much. Even his inner circle rotates. Old lieutenants retire, new ones trained early, nephews, cousins, sons, but always with distance. No one gets the whole picture. Everyone holds a piece. That compartmentalization saves him more than once. When Hector El Güero Palma is arrested and Chapo remains in custody, the authorities look for the next kingpin, the next obvious boss. But there's no coronation, no ascension. Just a man who never left his position because he never claimed a title. One of the more surreal aspects of El Mayo's rise is how little he seems to rise. There's no dramatic moment where he declares himself the top of the Sinaloa cartel. In fact, if you were to ask locals in 1995 who ran things, they'd shrug. There's Chapo, yes, and maybe Mayo. But really it's the mountains. That's how woven he is into the land itself. Not above it. Inside it. Meanwhile, his influence extends into politics. Quietly. He doesn't bribe presidents. He doesn't need to. He bribes the guy who schedules the meeting, the assistant who prints the agenda, the municipal clerk who, misplaces a report. He doesn't try to move the entire system. He just gums up one cog and the rest stalls naturally. And while the media fixates on Chapo's tunnels and daring prison escape plans, El Mayo solidifies his most powerful weapon, the absence of pattern. He changes phones constantly, sleeps in a different place every few nights, rides with different drivers, keeps no entourage, has no signature. When DEA files mention him, they almost always include phrases like believed to be, possibly involved, or rumored presence. For a man commanding billions in trade, that's almost comical. Many people still think that by this point, Mayo must have grown complacent, that his old-school methods would be overtaken by younger, hungrier traffickers. But those younger men, they study his playbook. They mimic his routes. They hire his old drivers. He's not behind the times. He is the clock, and he never boasts. When asked once during a rare recorded conversation how he's managed to stay free so long, his reply was a shrug and 2 words: no noise. The DEA, baffled by his lack of public presence, nicknames him the Invisible Architect. Not because he's unknown, but because every time they think they're closing in, he changes the frame. And so, while the cartels of Tijuana and Juarez begin warring, blood on sidewalks, shootouts in the news, El Mayo's shipments arrive without delay, without incident, without anyone noticing the trucks that just passed them on the road. The year is 1989, and Mexico holds its breath. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, the grand architect of the Guadalajara cartel, has just been arrested in his luxurious home in Guadalajara, taken down not by a midnight raid, but by a quiet knock and a handshake that turned into handcuffs. The man who once orchestrated trafficking routes like a stockbroker balancing markets is gone, and with him, the fragile peace he maintained begins to crack. Most cartel figures react like you'd expect, by lunging for territory like dogs tearing meat from bone. Shootouts erupt. Old allies turn suspicious. The Tijuana corridor becomes a powder keg, and everyone's watching to see who claims what. But not El Mayo. He doesn't attend the funeral. Not physically, not metaphorically. While the others squabble over plazas and profits, he's back in the hills, taking stock, not of the violence, but of the vacuum. He knows nature abhors one. Many people still think that El Mayo simply stayed out of the fight, that he chose peace over politics. But that's too simple. What he actually did was watch, timing moves like a chess player holding his breath 3 turns ahead. In the quiet months following Gallardo's fall, something begins to shift. A realignment, not formal, but felt. A loose association of traffickers from Sinaloa starts to cooperate in the shadows. Not a cartel, not yet. Just men who grew up in the same mountains, shared the same enemies, and spoke the same quiet dialect of wariness. Chapo Guzman, El Güero Palma, Mayo Zambada. They each bring something different. Chapo brings innovation, tunnels, ambition, and a flair for the dramatic. Palma brings muscle and a volatile temper. And Mayo? He brings structure, the ghost who whispers across maps, the man whose shipments don't scream. They sigh across borders without so much as a raised eyebrow. Together, they begin shaping what will become the Sinaloa cartel. But even in this formative stage, El Mayo keeps his distance. While Chapo and Palma pose for grainy photos or throw loud birthday parties with banda music and women flown in from Jalisco, El Mayo doesn't celebrate. He reorganizes. He rehires old drivers, reinforces his northern routes, sends feelers to Colombians looking to diversify from Miami to Mexico. He even builds informal alliances with smaller outfits in Sonora and Chihuahua, promising them protection if they follow his rules. Do you remember how he dislikes chaos? It's not just preference, it's policy. His greatest fear isn't the army or the DEA. It's unpredictability. That's why he trains his lieutenants to think calmly under pressure, to expect betrayal from friends, and to never draw a weapon unless the air is already thick with dust. He's not emotional, but he remembers everything. Like the time in 1990 when a young capo under Chapo's wing executed a rival mid-transaction. The product was lost, the payment disputed. Heat rolled in. El Mayo didn't yell, he didn't scold. He simply reassigned the plaza. The young capo, never seen again. People say he disappeared into the hills, or beneath them. No message was ever sent, but everyone heard it. This is also the point where Mayo begins diversifying his product. Cocaine remains king, but synthetic drugs are on the horizon. He experiments with methamphetamine labs hidden in palm groves, miles from any paved road. He studies chemicals, storage techniques, distribution patterns, learns which chemicals draw attention, learns who to bribe at the ports to avoid inspection. And while rivals are still focused on border crossings, El Mayo starts looking further north. Chicago, Atlanta, Denver. He doesn't want to just cross the US border. He wants to nest inside it. That's where his logistics background shines. He doesn't just move product into the US. He moves it within the US, using a web of drivers, stash houses, and seemingly legitimate businesses. Bakeries, tire shops, trucking companies, all cash-based, all subtle. He never owns these businesses directly. They're owned by cousins, distant nephews, lovers of lieutenants, all filtered, all forgettable. By 1992, shipments attributed to his network are appearing in Kansas, then Minneapolis, then Baltimore. The product doesn't shout. It settles, like dust. Meanwhile, violence erupts elsewhere. In Tijuana, the Arellano Felix brothers are waging war against anyone who questions their control. In Ciudad Juarez, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, is moving tons of cocaine in retrofitted jets. The newspapers are full of their names. El Mayo's name, barely whispered. Yet, in private DEA briefings, he's mentioned more frequently. Analysts can't figure him out. He doesn't fit the profile. He doesn't live extravagantly. Doesn't show up in intercepted calls. His voice isn't recorded. His signature isn't captured. Still, the patterns point to him. Too many shipments with the same footprint. Too many connections that loop back to his known associates. Many people still think that the authorities weren't trying hard enough, that they let El Mayo slip. But the truth is harder to swallow. He didn't leave a trail, because when El Mayo plans a shipment, he doesn't just think of trucks and cargo. He thinks of weather, of traffic patterns, of what the soldiers had for lunch. He once delayed a convoy 48 hours because a local wedding caused too much movement in a town 50 miles away. That's the level, and the reward, freedom. While Chapo enters and exits prison walls like a magician fumbling with keys, Mayo never gets cuffed, not even close. He's the only one of the founding triumvirate who never sets foot in a cell. He avoids traps by seeing them years before they're laid. In 1994, when Chapo escapes from prison for the first time, the spotlight swings wildly back to Sinaloa. Reporters descend, soldiers patrol, arrests spike. El Mayo simply adjusts his routes, switches from known border towns to lesser-used desert paths, tightens his circle, and above all, goes even quieter. One American agent famously said, "We knew when Chapo sneezed. We never even knew when Mayo breathed." By the mid-1990s, El Mayo's name is no longer just legend among traffickers. It's myth. Locals say he walks with no shadow, that birds fly different paths when he passes, that a horse once stopped and bowed when he entered a corral. Nonsense, of course. But when a man's face isn't in the papers, people build a new one from superstition, and that suits him just fine. The partnership with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman isn't inked. It's inhaled, like mountain air, like wildfire smoke. It's simply understood. Two men from the same brutal landscape, raised under the same sun, speaking in the same clipped, cautious tones. One craves attention, the other craves absence, and yet, together, they become the most lethal equation in the Mexican underworld. Their strengths are polar opposites. Chapo is restless, flashy, and compulsively operational. He builds empires like he's stacking playing cards in a windstorm, tunnels under walls, bribes in suitcases, compounds with golden bathrooms. El Mayo, by contrast, doesn't need architecture. He is the system. He doesn't stack cards. He writes the rules for the game. Together they forge something new. By the late 1990s, the Sinaloa Cartel isn't just a regional syndicate. It's becoming a multinational hydra with tentacles reaching across the border, into Central America, across the Caribbean, even as far as Spain. Chapo handles expansion. Mayo handles continuity. When new routes open, Mayo studies their vulnerabilities. When lieutenants get too ambitious, he folds them into silence or replaces them without ripple. And when shipments vanish, he doesn't scream. He recalculates. It's this calm, methodical nature that makes their partnership last far longer than anyone expected. Most cartel alliances crumble fast. Ego, betrayal, greed. But Mayo has no appetite for theatrics. When Chapo gets arrested again in 1993, and then again in 2001, it's Mayo who keeps the machine running. While others scramble, he's already adjusted. Do you remember the man who walked a donkey through the mountains? He's now managing a narcotics empire that spans half the hemisphere. And still, he walks. Still prefers handshakes over signatures. Still demands punctuality over praise. And while Chapo's legend grows, with headlines, arrests, escapes, and those infamous interviews, Mayo slips further into myth. No photos, no voice, just reports, just patterns, but their operations become increasingly sophisticated. The early 2000s are a renaissance of narco-innovation. El Mayo oversees the rise of narco submarines, semi-submersible vessels painted blue-gray to evade radar and packed with metric tons of cocaine. He studies the Pacific Ocean like he once studied cattle routes. Knows the patrol timings, the ocean depths, the winds. He starts experimenting with encrypted communication, pager codes, rotating SIMs, burst transmissions. Most of his messages aren't even messages. They're relayed movements. If truck A reaches checkpoint B, then shipment C proceeds. If not, a new plan unfurls, and he's not just reacting, he's predicting. One lieutenant, later captured and debriefed, told interrogators, Mayo would give you 3 orders. The first was for today. The second was if the weather changed. The third was if you got caught. That's how far ahead he thought. Meanwhile, U.S. agencies intensify their efforts. By 2004, El Mayo's name is etched into classified DEA files as a Tier 1 target. But they still can't place him. He never shows up on phone taps. His voice doesn't match any wiretaps. Photos are rare, outdated, unreliable. He becomes the ghost behind every shipment, the whisper behind every route. And yet, he's not untouchable. He knows this, which is why he treats every year like a borrowed one. He stops sleeping in the same house twice. He limits his contact, even with family. He trusts only those who have buried things for him. Secrets, favors, bodies. Many people still think that someone must have tried to betray him by now. Surely in all those decades, someone flipped. They did, but nothing stuck. Because El Mayo never shared everything with anyone. He lives by layers. Everyone in his network knows something, but no one knows everything. Even his own sons, as they come of age, are given pieces of the puzzle, but never the full picture. Speaking of family, this is the era when they begin to matter more. His son, Vicente Zambada Niebla, known as El Vicentillo, starts appearing in deeper operational roles. Trained in the same soft-spoken, high-discipline manner as his father, Vicente becomes a key player. A logistics officer in a criminal army without a flag. But El Mayo doesn't just hand over power. He guides, teaches, waits. And when Vicente begins flying too close to the sun, attending meetings in Mexico City, rubbing elbows with diplomats, Mayo says nothing, but others notice. And eventually, the world notices too. In 2009, Vicente is arrested by Mexican authorities and later extradited to the United States. It's a crushing moment for most fathers. For Mayo, it's an alarm. He doesn't lash out, doesn't vow revenge. He simply withdraws further, tightens every thread, retools his network to compensate. Vicente is gone, but the machinery doesn't miss a beat. That's the genius, because El Mayo has spent decades building not an empire of men, but a system of motion. One arrest doesn't cripple him. One shipment lost doesn't ruin him. He's built 1,000 quiet exits for every entrance. This is also when rumors begin to swirl about his health. Some say he's aging poorly. Others claim he's bedridden. A few whisper he's already dead. He's not, but he lets the rumors spread. Sometimes he feeds them. One DEA agent recounts how they intercepted a tip about Mayo being in a rural clinic for heart problems. They swarmed the site, raided. Nothing. Just a nurse who claimed a kind older man had been in the week before. No name, no ID. Later, a message surfaced in the network. Thanks for the checkup. I'm still walking. No name, no voice, but unmistakably him. And while all this unfolds, his bond with Chapo remains oddly stable. Like orbiting moons, never colliding, always circling. Chapo may be louder, riskier, constantly under the camera's glare. But Mayo, he endures. Many people still think that El Mayo feared arrest above all else, but perhaps it's more accurate to say he feared disruption, not being caught, being interrupted. He lives for the flow, the quiet rhythm of well-oiled smuggling. Anything that breaks the rhythm, that's the real threat. So he remains the eye in the storm, calm, calculating, present, even when unseen. And somewhere in the hills of Sinaloa, a man sits in a simple chair, radio buzzing softly in the background, tracking trucks he'll never ride and currencies he'll never touch. And still, somehow, orchestrating a criminal ballet the world can't quite catch. Innovation in the underworld doesn't always come in the form of bloodshed or betrayal. Sometimes it hums beneath the earth, sealed behind reinforced steel and dust. Enter the tunnels. While Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is often credited as the mastermind behind the infamous narco-tunnel system between Mexico and the United States, few people realize that the quiet brilliance of those passages, their efficiency, timing, and scale, owes just as much to the quiet man in the background. El Mayo doesn't dig with his hands. He doesn't sketch blueprints, but he ensures that every shovel of dirt is weighed against risk, cost, and timing. And it begins in the late 1990s, when border control tightens in Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez, pushing traffickers to innovate. Chapo, always eager for a spectacle, greenlights his first tunnel in Otay Mesa. But he doesn't do it alone. Mayo signs off, not on the construction itself, but on the back-end support, real estate shell companies, cross-border trucking logistics, bribed warehouse inspectors. He ensures that while one team digs under the line, another one builds the story above it. A bakery, a plastic supplier, a shipment of lemons. Whatever is needed to keep attention looking the wrong way. And once the tunnel opens, it runs like a Swiss watch. They don't move everything through it, just the high-value product. Cocaine, heroin, later fentanyl. The rest still goes the old-fashioned way, hidden in gas tanks, buried in produce, sewn into clothing. El Mayo always prefers redundancy. Never put all your bricks in one hole, as he's known to joke with the driest of grins. Many people still think these tunnels were just clever tricks, but they were entire systems. Air ventilation, lighting, steel tracks, wireless comms. And while El Chapo posed near one of them for a photo op, El Mayo had already moved on to the next route, before the authorities even finished photographing the first. That's how he thinks. Never in snapshots, always in sequences. And while the tunnels made headlines, El Mayo focused on the tech that didn't. He expanded the use of encrypted radios across his entire network, developed burn cycle protocols, phones that only operated for 30 minutes before being destroyed, hired engineers, not just gunmen, recruited university students to write code, even tested satellite dead zones for safer drone surveillance. Do you remember how he never stood still? That wasn't paranoia, it was method. A system in motion is harder to map, so he made sure everything kept moving. Products, people, plans, and all of this was happening as the Sinaloa cartel expanded rapidly, swallowing smaller outfits and rival networks with a kind of slow, deliberate patience. They didn't always fight for plazas. Sometimes they simply outlasted them. El Mayo's genius was understanding that in the drug world, speed gets you caught. Endurance gets you rich. That's why his routes through Sonora became legend. Not because they were the fastest, but because they always delivered. Regardless of weather, regardless of politics, regardless of who was arrested that week. He also began to experiment with sea routes, small, quiet boats that hugged the Pacific coast, carrying payloads wrapped in plastic and hope. Unlike Chapo, who favored jets and convoys, Mayo preferred the kind of transport that could float into obscurity. Less cargo, more consistency. And he didn't just ship drugs, he moved trust. Each delivery on time reinforced his network. Each avoided checkpoint deepened his legend. Even the Colombians took note. By the early 2000s, El Mayo was the preferred partner for several South American suppliers. Not because he paid the most, but because he paid on time. Never cheated. Never stalled. And if a shipment was seized, he covered the loss. Quietly, efficiently. There's a story told in whispers among former traffickers about a 2001 shipment lost off the coast of Nayarit. 20 million in product gone in a freak storm. The Colombians prepared for war. Within a week, Mayo's people delivered an envelope. No threats, no explanations. Just a repayment. In full. In cash. That's when they started calling him El Señor del Tiempo, the man of timing. He never claimed the title, but it stuck. And timing becomes even more critical when, in 2001, Chapo escapes from prison, infamously smuggled out in a laundry cart. It's a seismic moment in cartel history. The world gasps. The government blushes. and the media explodes. But Mayo, he adjusts. The escape brings heat. International attention, new task forces, satellite surveillance. While Chapo revels in his Houdini act, Mayo goes dark, relocates his safe houses, alters delivery schedules, changes vehicles every 48 hours. For 6 months, he's a blur, and once the news cycle cools, his network is leaner, stronger, more adaptable. Many people still think he must have been jealous, his partner stealing all the headlines. But truth be told, that's how he prefers it. The more the world chases Chapo's name, the less they notice the man behind the curtain. The man whose product still arrives, whose bribes still land, whose orders still echo, without echoing his name. And perhaps the most remarkable part of this era, he does it all without ever leaving Sinaloa. While other bosses flee to Guatemala or the mountains of Honduras, El Mayo stays near his roots, lives close to Badiraguado, sleeps in modest ranches, eats food from local farms, drives the same kind of trucks the farmers use. He's hiding in plain sight, not because he blends in, but because he's invisible by design. One DEA agent put it bluntly, he's like background noise in Sinaloa. Everyone knows he's there, no one knows where. That's how you survive. Because in the end, El Mayo isn't building a legacy. He's building an absence. He's the shadow that delivers, the silence that profits, the man who can never be caught, because he's never quite there. Family is both armor and exposure, and El Mayo Zambada knows this better than anyone. In his world, trust is measured in silence, not in blood. But still, he keeps his family close. Not in the way of warm dinners and smiling photos, but close in structure. Sons, nephews, in-laws, all trained not just in loyalty, but in invisibility. He doesn't hand down a throne. He hands down a manual, one that can't be written, only absorbed through years of careful observation. His eldest son, Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Vicentillo, starts taking on a larger role in the early 2000s. He's polished, articulate, even photogenic. A man of suits, not sombreros. He handles international negotiations, moves between Sinaloa and Mexico City, and appears to be the public-facing shadow of his father's operations. And this, oddly, is the problem. Vicente moves too well. He attracts attention, appears in photos, talks to men with too many connections. And El Mayo sees it happening, but he doesn't intervene. Not immediately. Because every lesson in the Zambada family is earned, not gifted. Meanwhile, his other sons and close relatives operate more like their father. Low profiles, high efficiency. Serafin Zambada Ortiz, one of the younger sons, is brought into the fold not through glory, but through routine. He learns routes, contacts, signals, not how to shoot, but how to notice. There's no ceremony, no promises, just expectations. In Sinaloa, people begin to see the outlines of a dynasty, not one built on bloodline ego like other cartels, but on discipline. El Mayo isn't trying to raise kings, he's raising shadows, and the mountain respects that. Many people still think that cartel families are chaotic, filled with betrayal and scheming. But for the Zambadas, it's different. Because Mayo doesn't tolerate emotional decisions. If a relative gets sloppy, he disappears. If a cousin gets greedy, he's cut off. There's no room for sentimentality, only continuity, and that's what makes the arrests sting harder. In 2009, Vicente is captured in Mexico City. The Americans had been watching, listening, waiting, and when he slips, they're ready. He's extradited, booked, and placed under U.S. custody. For El Mayo, it's not a shock. It's confirmation. That exposure always comes with ambition. He doesn't panic. He doesn't retaliate. He rewrites protocols, deletes phone numbers, relocates safe houses, and most importantly, replaces Vicente's functions within the network without pause, because that's how you survive. Then, in 2013, another blow. Serafine is arrested at the U.S. border, not with product, not with weapons, but simply for being who he is. The name alone was enough. He was trying to cross into Arizona, perhaps believing, foolishly, that the profile was low enough. It wasn't. Both arrests ripple through the cartel world. Rivals smell blood. The DEA celebrates. But inside the Sinaloa cartel, nothing collapses, because El Mayo never built his empire around any one person, not even his own flesh. Do you remember the story of the lost shipment that he replaced without word? That same philosophy applies here. Sons, like bricks, can be replaced. Quietly. Completely. Painfully, yes, but cleanly. And yet, despite his detachment, he's not heartless. He visits family, briefly, discreetly, sends messages through gestures more than words, pays for lawyers, covers debts, but he never lets grief blur the system. One former associate tells a chilling tale. After Serafine's arrest, a mid-level lieutenant asked El Mayo if they should retaliate against a known informant. Mayo didn't answer for nearly a full minute. Then he simply said, "He told the truth. That's not a sin. Being unprepared is. That's all." In that single phrase, he dismantled both the desire for vengeance and the myth of betrayal. At this point, his family's role becomes more abstract. Rather than pushing relatives into high-profile seats, he begins diffusing them, placing them in support roles, logistical points, legal gray areas where they can blend back into the blur. He understands something most don't. The more visible your heir, the shorter your reign. So, while Chapo's sons, the infamous Chapitos, begin asserting themselves with flair and force, Mayo's remaining family retreats into stillness. Less posturing, more planting. He spreads them across northern Mexico. Cousins in Culiacan. Nephews near the Sonoran border. A niece married into a quiet logistics chain near Hermosillo. Each one taught to operate autonomously, with no more than 2 points of connection between them and the core. And outside the family, Mayo builds surrogates. Trusted men raised from nothing. Old farmers turned watchmen. Mechanics turned radio runners. Each one tested not by their resume, but by how well they disappear when the heat rises. There's one man, known only as El Chato, who runs entire convoys from Mazatlan to Jalisco, and no one has a photo of him. No arrest record, not even a confirmed surname. DEA agents refer to him as Mayo's fingerprintless left hand. That's how the family functions now, not in birthday parties, but in functions. A son may be absent, but the route still works. The shipment still lands. The bribe still clears. Many people still think this level of control is impossible, that eventually someone must talk, someone must flip. But here's the strange thing. The Zambada family produces fewer informants than most. Not because they're untouchable, but because they were never fully included. Each one was trained to handle a piece of the puzzle, never the whole picture. So even when they're caught, their value to authorities is limited. Vicente, for example, does cooperate with U.S. prosecutors. But what he offers is historical, a retrospective, not coordinates, not real-time routes. By the time his testimony reaches courtrooms, El Mayo has already rebuilt the scaffolding from scratch, and perhaps that's the core difference between him and the others. He doesn't fear betrayal. He plans for it. Like a tree shedding branches in a storm. The leaves fall. The core remains. He doesn't own a throne, but he knows how to keep one empty. In the drug world, visibility is gravity. It pulls everything toward you. Money, loyalty, betrayal, bullets. El Mayo avoids it all by refusing to sit still. Even now, well into the 2000s, he continues to operate not from a headquarters, but from motion itself. A rotating circuit of ranches, abandoned haciendas, mountain hideouts, and borrowed living rooms. If power were measured by photographs, he wouldn't exist. And yet, by now, El Mayo Zambada is the most senior figure in the Sinaloa cartel, maybe in all of Mexico. But ask 10 people who leads the organization, and you'll get 10 different answers. It's Chapo. No, it's the Chapitos now. Some say Damaso. And always from the corners. Or maybe Mayo, because while others flash names and tattoos and corridos, Mayo continues with his strategy. No noise, no trace, no contradiction, and it works. He starts shifting the cartel's philosophy too, away from brutality and into bribery, away from headlines and toward habits. His leadership isn't about charisma, it's about systems. He doesn't just want to survive, he wants permanence. And so the bribery expands. We're not talking about one-off payments to cops. This is infrastructure bribery, regular salaries for customs agents, monthly bonuses for military commanders, lifetime stipends for bureaucrats. Everything budgeted, tracked, reviewed. A payroll system so quiet, it rivals government efficiency. One intercepted message between lieutenants jokes, "We pay better than Pemex." And they're not wrong. Many people still think that narco operations are chaotic, but under Mayo, they start to resemble corporate portfolios. Decentralized, diversified, scalable. He divides regions into nodes, assigns operational teams to zones, cross-trains personnel in logistics, scouting, accounting, offers protection to those who stay quiet, replaces those who don't, calmly, without spectacle. Do you remember the man who used to count mule footsteps in the dirt? Now he's managing convoys of semi-trailers disguised as produce shipments, each outfitted with temperature control, GPS jamming devices, and rotation schedules that mimic legitimate logistics firms. One such firm, later revealed during a U.S. investigation, was registered under the name of a 76-year-old farmer with no idea he owned a fleet of trucks moving tens of millions in narcotics. Another operated out of a bakery that hadn't sold a single loaf in 5 years, but logged 600 cross-border deliveries in 18 months. This level of quiet intricacy doesn't just happen, it's engineered. And El Mayo is the engineer, but with scale comes risk. Rival factions begin to chafe. Some lieutenants, particularly those aligned with El Chapo's sons, the Chapitos, start pushing for more aggressive expansion. They want fast moves, flashy plays, the kind that put your name in news headlines and corrido lyrics. Mayo resists. He doesn't lecture, he simply adjusts, pulls his trusted operatives from unstable zones, builds backups, starts handing more tactical authority to quieter players in Sonora and Durango, shifts routes slightly, just enough to keep pressure off his core corridors. The DEA, sensing a rift, tries to exploit it. They pressure imprisoned informants, offer plea deals, try to map the rift between old-school Mayo and new-school Chapitos. But even among the splinters, Mayo's core remains intact. His lieutenants don't jump ship because they're not sailing toward glory. They're staying dry. While others chase headlines, they chase longevity. Still, the organization isn't without cracks. In the mid-2000s, reports surface of minor conflicts between Chapo's side and Mayo's over revenue splits and operational zones. Nothing public, just whispers, shifting loyalties, a few sudden disappearances, but it never explodes. Why? Because Mayo knows when to yield, not in defeat, but in patience. If the Chapitos want the city plazas, let them have them. Let them fight for clubs and ports. He'll keep the ranches, the valleys, the silence, and in that silence he thrives. One local story tells of a time in 2007 when a federal convoy passed through a sleepy village in Durango. They were looking for a key figure, interviewed half the town, searched homes, stood outside one property for over an hour, debating whether to enter. They never did. Inside, El Mayo, drinking black coffee, watching the weather. By the time they moved on, he was already gone. That's the pattern. He doesn't run, he evaporates. Many believe he communicates today the same way he did 20 years ago. Shortwave radios, verbal messengers, foot relays. Not out of fear, but out of design. Because every click of a cell tower is a breadcrumb, and ghosts don't leave trails. There's also another layer to his network: community loyalty. People in the Sierra Madre protect him, not because they're paid, though some are, but because they believe in him. To many, he's not a criminal. He's a provider. He funds clinics, rebuilds roads, pays for medicine, funerals, weddings. When hurricanes destroy crops, relief arrives, not from the government, but from men in unmarked trucks, dropping food and tools, with no paperwork and no questions. And those same men disappear the moment journalists arrive. That's why, even in areas dominated by fear, Mayo's name is spoken not with terror, but with a strange blend of reverence and resignation. He doesn't command loyalty, he cultivates it. The U.S. government, by this time, is throwing everything at the Sinaloa cartel: intel operations, surveillance drones, undercover agents, and every year they inch closer to Chapo. But Mayo, no confirmed sighting, no known residents, just rumors. And here's the strange irony. Even as his empire grows to become the most powerful in Mexico, he becomes less visible. No interviews, no new photos, no slipped-up calls, just movement. And perhaps that's the final lesson. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it listens, waits, adjusts, like wind in the canyons, or dust behind a truck no one notices, or a man who knows exactly how long he can stay before the soldiers return. You won't find his signature on any bribe, but you'll see his fingerprints in every corner of the system. Bribery under El Mayo's leadership becomes more than a tactic. It becomes policy. Not a single cash handoff under a table, but an ongoing structured relationship economy. If someone needs convincing, he doesn't offer a lump sum. He offers a salary, predictable, regular, quiet. At one point in the late 2000s, a Mexican intelligence officer reports an unusual pattern in rural Sinaloa: municipal budgets that don't match local infrastructure, roads paved with no paperwork, police forces with unusually high retention, a local clinic running on what appears to be divine funding. But it isn't God, it's Mayo. He's created a system that feeds the hands that could slap him until those hands no longer remember how to make a fist, and it scales. He doesn't just grease one gear, he oils the entire machine. Judges, journalists, port authorities, army captains, air traffic controllers. There's a rhythm to it, an invisible payroll that keeps the world spinning in his favor. One former customs officer, later arrested, told investigators, "We didn't work for him. We worked near him, but somehow the money always arrived on time." No names, no threats, just the steady, calming weight of cash. Do you remember how he learned to move in silence as a teen? That skill didn't end at mountains and mules. It extended into bureaucracy. He learned that people don't need to be corrupted all at once. They need to be relieved of debt, of worry, of risk. And so, his bribes don't feel like bribes. They feel like solutions. One particularly telling story involves a mid-level politician in Sonora. He'd been resistant to cartel influence, proud, clean, until his daughter fell ill. The treatment was expensive, out of reach. Then, anonymously, it was covered. Quietly, entirely. A month later, the politician's vote helped rezone a small port facility. It's now one of the Sinaloa cartel's quietest offload sites. Coincidence? Maybe. But El Mayo doesn't believe in coincidence. Only timing. Many people still think the cartel's power comes from guns. But guns are noisy. Bribes are soft. You sleep better with a full stomach and a clean bank account than you do with a pistol under your pillow. That's what makes him dangerous. Not his willingness to kill, but his ability to make killing unnecessary. Even the way he thinks about violence is economic. One DEA file from 2009 references intercepted communications between lieutenants discussing a rival cell. They wanted to retaliate for a perceived insult, publicly, brutally. Mayo's response? Is it worth 2 weeks of silence and 1 month of patrols? That's it. Not yes or no. Just a cost-benefit calculation. And they stood down, because under his model, every bullet has a price, not just in dollars, but in disruption. And Mayo hates disruption more than he hates betrayal. This strategy pays off. While other cartels spiral into civil wars, internal power struggles, and bloody turf battles, Mayo's faction stays oddly serene. It's not that they're weaker. They're disciplined. They understand the rules of the man they serve. And the rules are simple. No unnecessary attention. No unsanctioned revenge. No transaction without benefit. Even his hitmen, when he uses them, operate like surgeons. Quiet, clean, preferably out of town. One night in 2010, a known informant vanishes from a bar in Culiacan. No screams, no commotion. The bartender remembers a polite man helping the target to his car, claiming he'd had too much. That was the last anyone saw of him. No body was found, but 2 weeks later, a new informant showed up, one with better manners. Coincidence? Again, perhaps. But with El Mayo, it's always safer to assume intent. He also begins to refine how he communicates with his people. While Chapo grows more reliant on digital systems, Mayo goes backward. Radios, messengers, pre-agreed signals. A particular station played at a certain hour. A cigarette passed between fingers a certain way. His entire structure becomes a maze of gestures, codes, and layers, each one designed so that no single arrest can unravel the whole. And when arrests do happen, he adjusts. He doesn't mourn the loss of operatives. He updates the ledger, hires replacements, adjusts the route, reviews the timing. Many people still think he's heartless, but that's not quite right. He's mathematical. Feelings don't move product, discipline does. Even his personal guards, what little he uses, are trained more like monks than soldiers. No sunglasses, no chains, no loud jokes. Just eyes, patience, and routines designed to blend rather than repel. They say one of his top bodyguards once worked for the federal government, on a pension, still listed on payroll, never removed, but also never seen again by his colleagues. Sometimes, the quietest men in the village are the most dangerous, especially when they don't need to act dangerous. That's El Mayo's way. He's not a lion roaring in the desert. He's the desert itself, silent, shifting, swallowing what needs to be swallowed. And he's not above using myth to protect himself. Occasionally, a fake rumor will surface. El Mayo spotted in Argentina. El Mayo died of cancer. El Mayo surrendered. Each time, he lets the lie breathe, gives it room to grow. The more people think he's dead, the easier it is to move like he's already gone. And still, his shipments arrive, on time, untouched, unquestioned. Because at the end of the day, corruption isn't a tactic. For him, it's not even a vice, it's a currency. And El Mayo is its most faithful banker. It starts with a van and a laundry cart. January 19th, 2001. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, after nearly 8 years behind bars, vanishes from Puente Grande maximum security prison. Not in a firefight, not in a riot, but with the smooth efficiency of a man clocking out after a long shift, rolled out in a wheeled laundry basket. Just like that, the escape makes headlines around the world. Mexican authorities stammer through press conferences. The DEA fumes. And Chapo? He's halfway back to Sinaloa before the headlines even hit the morning papers. But behind that escape, in the places where cameras don't reach and microphones go blind, one question keeps coming up. Who orchestrated the silence? Because escapes don't just happen. They're constructed, like bridges or operas. And El Mayo? He doesn't push laundry carts, but he writes the music they roll to. He doesn't need to be seen inside the prison to make it happen. He needs to know who mops the floors, who rotates shifts, who brings in the meals. He needs to understand timing, movement, distraction. He needs the power of invisibility and credibility. And by 2001, he has both. Many people still think Chapo masterminded every detail of his escape. But insiders know. Nothing that's sophisticated happens without El Mayo's green light. Without his logistical spine, without his ability to calm the noise that erupts after, because the escape brings chaos, everyone's on edge. U.S. pressure intensifies. The Mexican government starts gutting its own agencies to find moles. Entire prison systems are shaken, but while others are ducking spotlights, Mayo is already adjusting. He shifts his personal schedule to make it less predictable. No one sees him twice in the same village. His routes through the Golden Triangle are tightened. His runners are rotated weekly, and his inner circle is trimmed, not out of panic, but preparation. Do you remember the way he thinks in options? If X, then Y. If not Y, then fall back Z. This moment, this escape, is a stress test. And Mayo doesn't just pass it, he thrives in it. Because chaos is a spotlight, and he spent decades learning to move in its blind spots. Even Chapo, flush with attention after the escape, knows to defer. While he returns to headlines, songs, and whispers of invincibility, El Mayo maintains distance, doesn't appear in celebration, doesn't call, doesn't boast. But the protection, the support, it's there. From 2001 onward, their bond deepens, not as co-leaders, but as two ends of a spectrum. Chapo is the performer, Mayo is the composer, and it shows in the aftermath. As Chapo builds safe houses and flaunts wealth, Mayo builds escape routes, not just for product, but for people. A driver picked up in Tijuana vanishes from custody after 2 days. A lieutenant wounded in a raid gets helicoptered to a ranch clinic nobody knew existed. A betrayed courier is intercepted before he flips, given a new name, a new face, and a second chance under strict watch. That's not cartel leadership. That's crisis architecture. And it isn't just internal. The government's hunt for cartel leaders intensifies in the early 2000s. They create new intelligence units, launch special task forces, begin leaning hard on public pressure to capture big names. Mayo responds not with counter-violence, but with misdirection. There's a spike in anonymous tips, most of them false. One says El Mayo is in Michoacan. Another claims he's hiding in the jungles of Chiapas. Authorities launch raids, arrest low-level dealers, seize empty properties. But Mayo, he's still on his land. Still walking trails his boots memorized before Google Maps existed. And the product still moves. One DEA analyst reviewing interdiction reports in 2002 remarks, "We're intercepting more than ever, and yet the flow hasn't dipped. There's someone coordinating at a level we can't touch. They don't name him, but they know who it is." Many people still think that after Chapo's escape, the focus shifted entirely to him. But that's not how cartels work. As Chapo draws attention, Mayo widens the lanes. He doubles down on the routes no one's watching, the ones through Coahuila, the ones that use fishing vessels disguised as tourism boats, and he doesn't brag, he adjusts. His team adopts tighter signal protocols. Orders become more visual, less verbal. Prearranged hand gestures, repeated routes until timing becomes muscle memory. Radios used only on low frequency, one channel, 15 seconds at a time. His core principle? Nothing should be exciting. If something goes too smoothly, it's reevaluated. If someone performs too well, they're retrained. Because perfection is a pattern, and patterns invite attention. One story from 2003 underscores this mindset. A local jefe under Mayo starts boasting about a new corridor through Zacatecas. Claims it's the fastest, safest route they've had in years. Mayo visits, sits down, listens, then quietly says, "If it's perfect, it's finished. Close it." And the corridor is shut down within 48 hours. No drama, no debate. Just a man too experienced to believe in luck. Do you remember the vanishing informant from the bar? It's the same rhythm. No reaction. Just removal. And in this era, as rival cartels begin to fracture, Tijuana's internal feuds, Juarez's leadership vacuum, the Gulf cartel's increasing brutality, El Mayo's faction remains steady because he doesn't allow factions. He allows function. If your behavior threatens flow, you're gone. If your ambition outpaces your discretion, you're silenced, not with a bullet, but with replacement. It's around this time that Mayo's roots become institutional. He's not just smuggling drugs, he's organizing supply chains. If a truck carrying tomatoes goes missing, he knows before the distributor does. If a customs officer gets promoted, he already knows the replacement's grandmother's maiden name. And that attention to detail reaches international scale. He strengthens ties with Colombian suppliers, some traditional, some new. Even builds channels to Venezuelan and Ecuadorian producers. He doesn't just buy product, he finances it, offers loans, ships materials, builds dependence, and that's his hidden weapon. You work with Mayo once, and you never want to work with anyone else again. Because he doesn't lie, doesn't overpromise, and most of all, doesn't disappear when something goes wrong. He just shows up later with a plan, and sometimes a second plan, and always with his hat low, his radio quiet, and the rest of the world scrambling to figure out how the man who never shows up still runs everything. Gunfire cracks through the streets of Culiacan like a thunderclap out of rhythm. It's October 17th, 2019. What later becomes known as El Jueves Negro, or Black Thursday. Mexican security forces have just attempted to arrest Ovidio Guzman, one of Chapo's sons. The response from the Sinaloa cartel is immediate, explosive, and unprecedented. Cartel gunmen flood the city. Convoys with mounted machine guns swarm intersections. Barricades erupt from burning trucks. Civilians flee, huddling in corners of grocery stores. watching a modern capital devolve into war in minutes. And behind all of it, behind the smoke and screaming, one question drifts quietly through every military radio channel and newsroom report. Where is El Mayo? The answer, as always, not there, but everywhere, because what's happening in Culiacan isn't his style. This is the new breed, the Chapitos, emboldened by legacy and recklessness. Their solution to crisis is show of force. Mayo's solution? Disappear before the question even forms. He doesn't call for war. He calls for structure. And that's why, when Ovidio is released, when the government blinks and folds under the pressure of bullets and panic, it's not just seen as a victory for the Guzmans. It's a reminder the Sinaloa cartel still moves with authority, even if the faces in the front row have changed. But behind the curtain, still the same steady conductor. Do you remember how he avoids flash? This moment, as violent and viral as it is, only cements El Mayo's long-held principle. Visibility is vulnerability. After Culiacan burns, he pulls back even further. His name appears less frequently in intercepted communications. His core team rotates locations more frequently. And according to some reports, even his own family members are no longer informed of his movements more than a few hours in advance. Many people still think that Black Thursday signaled the end of El Mayo's era, that the Chapitos had officially taken control. But reality, like most things with El Mayo, is more complicated, because while they roar, he listens, and while they posture, he plans. In the aftermath, the cartel seems split. Two camps emerging within Sinaloa. On one side, the Chapitos, flashy, impatient, driven by fear and fury. On the other, the Mayo loyalists, older, quieter, less eager to provoke. But this isn't civil war, it's cohabitation. Uneasy? Yes, but functional. Why? Because Mayo keeps it that way. He steps back. Not in surrender, but in strategy. Lets the boys have the stage while he manages what they often forget. The books, the shipments don't stop. The payments don't falter. The bribes still land on time. Cities don't burn under Mayo's watch. They hum. The ports keep moving. The airstrips stay quiet. And the accountants, they still call his people for updates. Even the Colombians begin requesting that shipments not be routed through Chapito-controlled plazas. Too noisy, they say. Too unstable. Instead, they go through Durango, Sonora, and the old valleys of Sinaloa, where Mayo still whispers, and it's not just drug routes. He continues diversifying. In the 2010s, Mayo greenlights deeper ventures into chemical precursors, not finished meth or fentanyl, but the ingredients. Legal on paper, lethal in practice. He shifts shipments through Asia, using ports in Manzanillo and Lázaro Cárdenas. Imports labeled as cosmetics, detergents, industrial dyes. It's not just trafficking now, it's manufacturing. He finances local labs, small, mobile, nearly invisible, hidden in avocado groves and near mango orchards, sometimes disguised as refrigeration units, easily packed, easily moved, always protected. And through it all, his footprint? Still ghost-like. One soldier in an elite anti-cartel unit recalls an operation in 2018. A tip pointed to a ranch directly under Mayo's command. They arrived at dawn, fully armed, found an empty property with grazing cattle, untouched coffee mugs on the table, and a handwritten note folded under a rock outside the door. It read, "You're early. I was earlier." No signature, no threat, just Mayo's sense of timing. And that timing becomes even more important as global attention on fentanyl grows. U.S. pressure ramps up, sanctions increase, rewards are offered, and yet, Mayo still walks. In 2021, the U.S. State Department ups the bounty for his capture to $15 million, one of the highest for any fugitive in the world. They call him a top-tier priority, a trafficker of catastrophic reach, a threat to public health and national security. But they still don't have a photo from the last decade, because Mayo doesn't show up on drones or cell towers or surveillance grids. He shows up in outcomes. A shipment intercepted in San Diego? His. A raid in Baja that finds nothing but a scribbled map and some plastic drums? His. A customs officer in Mazatlan resigns suddenly, buys a farm, and never talks again? His touch. He doesn't act like a man on the run. He acts like a man who's already arranged the exit. Many people still think he must be hiding in a bunker. But those who know the Sierra Madre terrain say otherwise. They say he's where he's always been, walking. A different path each day. A different shelter each week. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with a single companion. Often a boy too young to know the weight of the man beside him. And the landscape still protects him. Because in the valleys of Sinaloa, his name doesn't provoke fear. It provokes a strange sense of stability. He's not the narco who kills your cousin. He's the one who pays your uncle's funeral costs, replaces your lost tractor, fixes the collapsed bridge no mayor remembers. That's how deep the roots go. So when the world asks, why hasn't El Mayo been caught? The answer isn't incompetence, it's calculation. Because while everyone was chasing kings, he became weather. And who can catch the rain? They say he died. More than once. The rumors start in the hills. A whisper near El Dorado. A second-hand tale from a cousin in Badiraguado. Mayo's gone, someone says. Heart failure. Or was it COVID? Or old age? Or maybe a sniper. Then, a week later, a convoy arrives on time. A shipment clears a checkpoint. A rancher gets a quiet envelope to cover his daughter's surgery. And just like that, the myth retracts. He's alive again. But is he? That's the question that begins to echo louder in the 2020s. Because by now, El Mayo Zambada is not just a man. He's a mystery so deeply woven into Mexico's criminal fabric that even his absence is present. You can't confirm his location. You can't record his voice. And yet, the signs are there. Payments still move through the corridors he built. Orders are still carried out in his tone. And most tellingly, no one has claimed his place, because to claim it would mean proving he's gone. And no one wants to be the one who gets that wrong. Many people still think that his death, if it's happened, has been hidden to preserve control. That his lieutenants keep the machinery running, pretending he's still watching. That no one dares change the rhythm, because the ghost still might be listening. But there's another theory, one more unsettling, that he never died, that he still walks, that he simply reached the final level of invisibility, a life so disconnected from systems, names, and even family, that only the forest knows his shape anymore. Do you remember how he could vanish from a ranch 10 minutes before a raid? How his dogs would remain, quiet, waiting for his return? That instinct doesn't vanish. It just slows. If he's alive, they say he moves slower now, prefers mules to trucks, watches radios instead of using them, sleeps in houses with no roofs, eats what others eat, drinks only water boiled over fire. His guards aren't mercenaries anymore. They're farmers, men with sun-dried skin and no last names. Their rifles are dusty, their silence absolute. They don't protect him because they're paid. They protect him because he once paid for their mother's medicine. Because when a hurricane leveled the road, he sent gravel, not promises. In the highest peaks of the Sierra Madre, where birds dart through mist and pine trees shiver with the breeze, there's a small clearing some say he favors. Not a compound, no walls, just a chair made from old wood and wire, a table with no legs, balanced on 2 rocks, and a jug of coffee, already warm by the time the sun arrives. No guards, no radios, just Mayo. And sometimes, if the wind is still, a voice speaks softly to no one in particular. Everything moves, even mountains. So I stay quiet. The wind carries it. The branches nod. And somewhere, miles away, a truck driver gets a call that it's safe to leave. Still alive? Maybe, or maybe not. But the truth? It doesn't matter. Because whether he breathes or not, the effect remains. Roots don't run unless he's rumored to approve them. Lieutenants won't switch allegiances until they're sure he won't call them at dusk. Families still light a candle for him on the day his daughter died. Because he once paid for 50 funerals when the mine collapsed. He is present, not in the flesh but in the pattern. That's what makes him different from the others. Chapo needed headlines. The Chapitos need respect. Other bosses needed fear. But Mayo? He needed continuity, so whether he sleeps in the mountains or in memory, the system continues. And the man who began as a boy with a donkey and a burlap sack now exists in every whispered transaction, every bribe written in silence, every path that no drone has ever mapped. And maybe that's what he wanted all along. Not immortality, not glory, just a kind of flow that could live without him. And now, as the world wonders if he's finally stopped walking, one can only imagine him sitting at the edge of some high ridge, hat low over his brow, hands quiet in his lap, and that same look on his face, half tired, half listening, still, like fog that never lifts. American agents sit in windowless rooms filled with glowing monitors, grainy footage, and names scrawled across corkboards in red ink. Among them, Zambada, Ismael, a ghost with a $15 million price tag on his head and no confirmed address, no voice samples, no recent photograph. All they have are fragments, a truck seen leaving a ranch, a blurred figure crossing a street in El Fuerte, a whisper in a tapped call. Let me check with the old man, but the trail never leads to a door, only to silence. The DEA has tried everything. They've used drones over the Sierra Madre, satellites with infrared signatures, undercover agents posing as ranch hands. They've traced money wires, followed cell signals, even arrested Mayo's lawyers, and still nothing. It's like trying to catch fog with a net. One special agent, during a private panel briefing in 2020, put it plainly: we've caught every boss of his generation, Gallardo, Caro Quintero, Chapo, all but one, the one who never stopped walking. Because El Mayo's survival isn't luck, it's a result of design. He has never allowed himself to become indispensable in any single part of the cartel. He isn't the face of the business. He's the gravity holding it together. When he gives orders, they're carried through 3 intermediaries, each unaware of the original source. When a shipment is late, it doesn't get fixed. It gets replaced. There's always a backup. Always another option. Do you remember how he planned escape routes even for his mules? That same mentality applies to everything. Nothing in his operation is irreplaceable. Not even him. This is what makes DEA profiling so maddening. You can't model a man who disappears on purpose. He doesn't chase excess, doesn't hoard weapons, doesn't fly to Dubai. He isn't laundering cash through casinos or Instagram influencers. His money is quiet, hidden in cattle, in grain silos, in rainfall subsidies and banana farms, and his face, almost mythic now. The last confirmed photograph is decades old. A younger man with a flat expression and sharp cheekbones under a wide-brimmed hat. A face that could belong to any rancher in the valleys. A face that doesn't demand attention. One former associate claimed Mayo had dental work done specifically to match generic dental records. Another said he filed ownership of certain properties under names created from merged death certificates and forged baptismal records. Many people still think the U.S. could find him if they really tried. But try they have. They've traced calls made within seconds of a cartel killing, only to find the SIM registered to a fruit vendor in Baja. They've followed supply chains back through 5 shell companies, 3 of which don't even exist on paper. And they've searched towns that were warned to be silent before the boots ever hit the ground. He doesn't hide behind walls. He hides behind timing, like the time a military patrol in Durango raided a suspected safe house. Everything was perfect. Intercepted call, anonymous tip, GPS data. But inside, nothing. Not even a cold cup of coffee. What they missed, someone said later, was who had made the coffee just 12 minutes before they arrived. And if they had been early, a different house, a different exit, same result. Because El Mayo isn't stationary, he's rhythmic. He moves not just to avoid capture, but to maintain advantage. And part of that advantage? Letting the DEA wonder if he's even alive. When Vicente Zambada, his own son, begins cooperating with U.S. prosecutors after his arrest, the world expects a collapse, a son flipping on his father. That's cinematic gold. But the script doesn't play out. Vicente offers insights, testifies about routes, meetings, past deals. But he can't give them El Mayo, because even Vicente never had the full picture. His father raised him with walls, clearances, limits, gaps in information. It wasn't mistrust, it was security. Even inside the family, Mayo's true movements are known only to a select few. And even they never know the whole route. One law enforcement analyst likens him to a dead switch. You can cut 100 wires and never shut the lights off, because you don't know which wire is his. And while they search, the world changes. The business changes. Cocaine gives way to fentanyl. Smuggling shifts from bulk shipments to micro doses, sent through private parcels and human couriers. Cartel leadership grows younger, louder, more reckless. But El Mayo, he simply adapts. He begins diversifying into management. Less hands-on, more indirect. He trains successors, not to replace him, but to continue the structure. Each man taught the 3 rules: never appear in photos, never call the same number twice, never speak more than you listen. This new generation of Mayo men handles logistics, bribes, even negotiations. They act with his voice, but never in his name. His presence is now procedural, institutional, ritualistic. Even his enemies respect it. There's a whispered story of a rival cartel boss who tried to assassinate one of Mayo's lieutenants. The attempt failed. The boss disappeared a week later. Not violently, not with drama. He was simply removed. And no one took credit, because that's Mayo's way. When something becomes loud, he removes the sound, not the source. He's not fighting a war. He's maintaining a balance. Many people still think that in his old age he must be losing grip, that no one can stay sharp forever, that the weight of decades would eventually dull his instincts. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Routes still move, payments still land. His people still nod when they hear his name. And more importantly, his enemies still pause, because whether he's breathing or buried, the effect is the same. You don't disrespect a legend when the legend might still be watching. And so, across courtrooms, command centers, and corridors of speculation, the question hangs heavier than ever. Is he still out there? And if he is, why haven't we found him yet? The air outside Culiacan hums different when a sun falls. It's March 19th, 2009, when Vicente Zambada Niebla, El Vicentillo, is arrested by Mexican authorities. He's calm, almost smug, as they lead him away. Dressed in a tailored shirt, hair neat, his expression betrays no fear, as if he knows the story isn't over, only rewrote. For years, Vicente had been the heir apparent, the public face of El Mayo's inner circle, charismatic, bilingual, the kind of figure who could sit down with Colombian traffickers one day and Mexican generals the next. His name was becoming known, too known, and El Mayo had been watching. Do you remember how he never handed anyone the whole map? Vicente had the training, but not the keys. His arrest hurts, yes, but it doesn't break anything. Still, it's a personal hit. The news explodes across headlines. DEA officials celebrate. Commentators speculate that the Sinaloa cartel will fracture, that El Mayo's days of quiet dominance are numbered, that he'll lash out, make mistakes, try something desperate. But El Mayo doesn't make mistakes. He makes adjustments. Within 72 hours, his routes are shifted. Safe houses are abandoned. Entire phone networks go dark. Drivers rotate. Every person connected to Vicente is reviewed, reassigned, or erased from the board. By the end of the week, it's as if Vicente never existed. Operationally, at least. Emotionally, that's different. Some say Mayo visited his son's wife 2 days later. Said nothing. Just left behind a small envelope with no name, no seal. Inside a single line. You're still covered, because even in loss he provides. But Vicente's story isn't over. In 2010, he's extradited to the United States. And in 2014, it's confirmed. He's flipped. He's become a cooperating witness, testifying against former associates, offering insight into the cartel's hierarchy and inner workings. And this is supposed to be devastating. A son testifying about his father's empire? That's Shakespearean. Federal prosecutors prepare for a tidal wave of intelligence. They expect addresses, voice recordings, confessions, real-time updates. But what they get is history. Vicente knows the past, the routes he managed, the meetings he attended, the payments he authorized. But not once does he offer a location for his father. Not once does he give a phone number, a current contact, a confirmed photo. Because he doesn't have it. That's how deeply Mayo built the walls. One U.S. agent called it the cleanest dirty operation I've ever seen. Because even as Vicente described logistics in vivid detail, warehouses in Guadalajara, safe houses in Tijuana, cocaine pickups in Guatemala, none of it touched El Mayo directly. No evidence, no signatures, just implication. And implication doesn't hold up in court. Many people still think Mayo must have cut off his son, that he viewed the cooperation as betrayal. But there are other rumors. Rumors that Vicente was instructed to cooperate, that Mayo saw the pressure mounting and gave him a simple directive. Survive. Because in this business, survival is the only true legacy. And if a son can survive by telling stories the father already rewrote, that's not betrayal. That's strategy. Later, another son, Serafin Zambada Ortiz, is arrested in 2013 at the U.S. border. A smaller player, younger, more reckless. He's charged with trafficking. He pleads guilty, serves time. And just like Vicente, he gives no current intelligence, no map to the father. When he's released in 2018, he disappears. No press, no welcome home, just silence. And El Mayo, still untouched. It becomes clear to authorities that the family is not a weakness. It's a filter. Each son, cousin, and nephew given a role, but never given the crown. Because in the Zambada world, the name is shared, but the access earned. Do you remember how he once trained operatives in gesture-based communication? That level of control extends to family too. A look, a nod, a missing word. It's how orders are given, how trust is confirmed, and how boundaries are set. After the arrests, journalists predict a decline. They claim that Mayo is too old, too isolated, that the Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, will eclipse him, but reports on the ground say otherwise. His routes still move, his shipments still arrive, and even rivals still lower their voice when they say his name. Because his absence isn't a vacuum, it's a signal. He doesn't retaliate, doesn't give interviews, doesn't leak videos of himself in designer shirts, surrounded by guards. He just tightens his system, he turns up the silence, and slowly, the world begins to understand. You can't dismantle a web by pulling at threads you can't see. The suns fall, the suns flip, but the system remains. One former cartel accountant, now in witness protection, said it best. The cartel was never built for his family to run. It was built so he could leave it any time, and it would keep going like a wind-up clock. And maybe that's the secret to his longevity. He didn't build an empire of loyalty. He built an empire of systems. He speaks like a farmer, but he negotiates like a diplomat. As the 2010s unfold, El Mayo takes on a role that few outside the cartel world ever see, but those inside never forget. Peacemaker. It's not the kind of peace earned through treaties or handshakes on camera. It's the type whispered in dirt floor rooms, over bitter coffee and guns laid on the table like tired truths. Because while the Sinaloa cartel continues to grow, it also begins to strain. Factions swell, territories overlap, ambitions rub raw. Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos, want speed, visibility, newer markets. El Mayo's side wants structure, consistency, silence. Sparks fly, and every spark, a chance for a wildfire. But Mayo doesn't panic, he mediates. He starts hosting meetings, not in lavish hideouts, but in modest ranches where cows wander near the firewood stack. Rivals arrive tense, surrounded by armed men. But the moment they cross into Mayo's space, the rules change. Guns stay outside. Voices stay low. No threats, no boasting, just strategy. One attendee described it like entering a confessional booth. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, everything quieted. Even the dogs outside. These summits aren't about surrender. They're about function. If one cell loses a plaza, they're offered another. If a shipment was intercepted, repayment is split according to risk ratios. It's cartel diplomacy at its most intricate. And Mayo, he doesn't demand respect. He receives it naturally. Do you remember how he used to balance deliveries on a donkey's back? This is the same principle. Weight distribution. No one man carries too much. No territory is irreplaceable. If you lose one, you reroute. You adapt. That's what he teaches, and it works. Throughout the 2010s, as other cartels implode, Tijuana bleeds out in civil war, Juarez splinters into smaller gangs, the Zetas collapse into cannibalistic chaos, Sinaloa remains functional, not peaceful, but operational. Because while the Chapitos chase new rackets, while younger traffickers experiment with cryptocurrency and social media, Mayo keeps his hand on the wheel, even if no one sees him. And when conflicts do arise, like the quiet rebellion brewing in 2017 between the younger lieutenants and the old guard, Mayo doesn't send killers. He sends questions. Who profits if we fight? Who loses the most if you win? Who's prepared for the silence that follows a gunshot? And in most cases, that's enough, because even the ambitious understand. A plaza drenched in blood doesn't move product. A route under federal investigation doesn't pay bills. Violence gets attention. Attention gets arrested. Many people still think El Mayo ruled by fear. But the truth is stranger. He ruled by outcomes. His system worked. And that was enough. Even the government took notice. One internal memo from Mexico's Secretariat of Public Security, leaked in 2018, included a curious phrase. Zambada's sector remains calm, not due to military presence, but due to internal governance. Internal governance. That's not something you write about a drug lord. That's something you write about a mayor, or more accurately, a manager, because that's what El Mayo becomes in his final era. Not a warlord, not a tyrant, but a manager of criminal flow. He watches maps, tracks prices, studies arrests, adjusts accordingly. He doesn't try to stop the bleeding in other cartels. He just makes sure the tourniquets are clean and the replacements trained. There's a story from 2015. A shipment of fentanyl is delayed crossing into California. The driver panics. His contact goes silent. He's sure he'll be killed. Then, 2 days later, a woman arrives at his house, middle-aged, plain clothes, no guards. She hands him a folded paper, a new date, a new location, a small bonus. No apology, no threat. Just a reminder that someone is always watching the clock. That's Mayo's management style, and he applies it to external threats too. When a prominent journalist publishes a piece implicating high-level traffickers in the Sierra region, most expect retaliation. After all, dozens of reporters have disappeared for less, but this journalist isn't touched. Later, it's said Mayo intervened. Not out of mercy, but calculation. If we silence her, he reportedly told his people, 1,000 questions follow. If she writes again, only 50 care. That's the math. That's the patience. Even in federal operations, his fingerprints are invisible, but palpable. In 2016, a multi-agency task force plans a sweep through Sinaloa's mountains. Dozens of arrests are made. But curiously, the few ranches suspected of housing Mayo's loyalists are already empty. And in the days after, not a single reprisal, no messages, no burned vehicles, just quiet, because Mayo had seen the sweep coming weeks earlier, moved his people, adjusted his routes, paid a few mayors to redirect the soldiers to easier targets. By the time boots hit the dirt, the trail was already cold. That's how he leads. No banners, no Instagram videos, no oaths of vengeance, just results. And that quiet, deliberate leadership becomes his final legacy. He doesn't leave behind speeches or manifestos, just a generation of men and women who learned to move without maps, to speak without speaking, to act without asking. And they still call him El Señor, even if they don't know where he is, even if he's gone, because the name isn't a person anymore, it's a process. By 2016, the silence surrounding El Mayo becomes louder than any gunshot. That same year, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman is recaptured again. After a daring second escape and months of international pursuit, he's finally cornered in Los Mochis and extradited to the United States. Cameras flash, media swarms, and the narco world shifts. But somewhere in the hills of Sinaloa, El Mayo exhales. Not because he's safe, but because the spotlight just moved again. With Chapo gone, permanently this time, there's a new question floating in federal agencies and cartel circles alike. Who's in charge now? And quietly, predictably, inevitably, the answer is him. Not because he declares it. Not because he moves into a golden mansion. But because nothing stops working. Routes still flow. Bribes still clear. No one misses a payment. The machine keeps humming, and everyone realizes it was always his machine. Do you remember how he let others stand in front? Chapo was the lightning rod, the symbol, the distraction. But Mayo, he was the current. Now, That current runs unopposed. Many people still think this would be his moment to consolidate power, step into full leadership, maybe even reform the cartel under his sole authority. But that's not how he works. He doesn't centralize, he distributes. His first move post-Chapo isn't domination, it's stabilization. He holds a series of quiet meetings. Not mass gatherings, just one-on-ones. Old lieutenants, younger cell leaders, regional bosses. No threats, no ultimatums. Just reminders. Keep it moving. Keep it quiet. Keep it separate. It's not a speech. It's a standard. And it works. Under his guidance, the Sinaloa cartel becomes more corporate than criminal. Cell structures resemble business units. Each has a leader, a payroll, a supply chain. Meetings are disguised as family reunions. Orders are passed like small-town gossip, soft, indirect, trace-free. But there's one rising threat, the Chapitos, Chapo's sons, Ivan, Jesus Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquin Jr., are not cut from their father's cloth. They're younger, bolder, louder. They race Lamborghinis through Culiacan. They post selfies. They challenge rivals on encrypted apps. To Mayo, they are disruption incarnate. But he doesn't confront them. He accommodates, carefully. He allows them control of certain plazas, mostly urban areas, Culiacan, parts of Jalisco, bits of Baja. He focuses on the mountains, the ports, the infrastructure. They handle the turf. He handles the flow. It's uneasy. At times, explosive. Tensions flare in 2019 and 2020. A few lieutenants defect. There are skirmishes, ambushes in Sinaloa, a bombing in Sonora. People wonder if war is coming. But Mayo, as always, responds with timing, not fire. He reinforces loyalty. Quiet visits, small payments, strategic favors. A shipment arrives early here. A medical bill gets paid there. Nothing flashy. Just value. Because in his world, people don't follow you out of fear. They follow you because you make their lives easier. And what of the DEA? They're still searching, still guessing, still baffled. In 2017, a coordinated joint operation between U.S. and Mexican authorities attempts to triangulate Mayo's location based on known safe houses and satellite surveillance. They raid 5 sites across Sinaloa, arrest 24 low-level operatives, seize weapons, seize cash, but they don't find Mayo. What they do find is telling. Empty coffee mugs still warm, a discarded poncho, a radio tuned to an unused frequency. His trail is always just behind the wind. One agent, frustrated, calls him a mirage with a payroll. Another says, he doesn't hide from us. He just doesn't need to be found, because by now, his role has evolved again. He's no longer just a boss or even a manager. He's a custodian, a guardian of a system too big to fail, but still needing a quiet hand to keep it from shaking itself apart. And he adapts with the times. By the late 2010s, he's overseeing the cartel's shift into fentanyl. Smaller, stronger, easier to move. Labs hidden in avocado farms. Couriers that carry enough to kill cities in coat linings. The trade is faster, riskier, and more profitable than anything before. But Mayo applies the same principles. Slow growth, reliable output, minimal noise. His people avoid overproduction. They space shipments weeks apart. They avoid flashy ports. And most importantly, they keep testing. Purity, strength, packaging. Because Mayo doesn't sell poison for chaos. He sells it for profit. Ethical? No, but methodical? Always. And still, he walks. Or maybe not. By 2020, rumors of illness swirl again. Some say diabetes. Others, kidney failure. A few claim he's on dialysis in a mobile clinic hidden in the hills. But no confirmation ever comes. He continues sending orders. His operatives still reference El Viejo. His dogs are still seen wandering trails 2 hours before convoys pass. He may be aging, but he's still active, and more importantly, untouched. He remains the last of his generation. Caro Quintero is rearrested. El Azul reportedly dies. Chapo is in a U.S. prison for life. The Arellano Felix brothers are gone. The Beltran Leyvas are scattered, but Mayo, still unshackled, still unnamed on a booking report, still unphotographed in a courtroom, still there. And that raises a new kind of question. Not, when will they catch him? But will they catch him? Because by now, it's no longer about arrest. It's about legacy. He's lived through 5 presidencies, 2 generations of narco-evolution, and over 40 years of war, and never once seen a courtroom. Not as a witness, not as a defendant, not even as a mugshot. By 2021, the man they call El Mayo is no longer just a fugitive. He's a phenomenon. He has outlasted nearly every figure in the narco pantheon. He's not a headline. He's the absence beneath the headline. He's not feared like El Chapo or romanticized like Escobar. He's respected, even in his absence. And still, the question echoes in every agency tasked with finding him. How is this man still free? The answer lies in his design. Mayo has never tried to win the war on drugs. He's tried to outlast it. While governments launch offensives, while rival cartels spiral into cycles of vengeance and viral brutality, he stays with his oldest tactic: motion. He's not in one place, he's not in one photo, he's not on one phone. He is instead the quiet hum of continuity. And as his empire enters the digital age, he adapts again. Not by logging into encrypted messaging apps or building social media networks like his younger rivals, but by weaponizing simplicity. His messages go analog, written on paper, carried by foot. Instructions coded in phrases passed down orally like family recipes. There's a rhythm to it. His orders sound less like commands, more like proverbs. A cow that wanders finds no pasture. If they ask for water, ask why they're thirsty. No dog barks if you never knock. These sayings pass through his network like scripture. Each phrase, depending on context, might mean change the route, avoid a deal, delay payment. His lieutenants don't need full explanations. They've been trained to listen beneath the words. Many people still think modern technology is the enemy of men like Mayo, but he's turned it into his decoy. He lets others run WhatsApp chains, lets the chapados share voice notes and memes, lets the government think they're tracing traffic. Meanwhile, his world continues untouched, beneath the surface, beneath the signal. Do you remember the story of the intercepted raid where they found only warm coffee? That's the metaphor for his whole operation. By the time you arrive, he's already adjusted. And as time moves forward, the Sinaloa cartel under his guidance becomes less like a gang and more like a brand. Its reputation, steady, global, efficient, isn't built on violence anymore. It's built on delivery. From fentanyl in the Midwest to cocaine in Australia, the routes function like a logistics giant. There are regional managers, inventory reports, payment audits. A cartel, yes, but also a company. Mayo never registers a single one of these entities in his name, but through layers of shell companies, silent partners, and front-facing enterprises, he orchestrates them like a symphony. There's a tomato export business in Sonora, a livestock transport company in Sinaloa, a fishing outfit in Baja. None of them ever link back to him on paper, but they all function on his calendar. He's not flashy, but he's fluid. When one channel is exposed, he opens another. When one officer turns, he replaces them before they realize they've become predictable. He moves money not through briefcases, but through invoices, taxes, supply shortages. A $4,000 tractor rental covers a 1.2 million load of meth, because in Mayo's world, every line of paperwork is a possible disguise. The agencies watching him know this, but they can't prove it, and they know time isn't on their side, because El Mayo, now well into his 70s, may not die in a gunfight or a prison cell. He may simply fade. There's a saying among older traffickers in the Sierra, Mayo won't be caught, he'll be forgotten into victory. And maybe that's already happening. Even his own people no longer expect to see him in person. His orders are sacred not because they're barked, but because they're rare. When a message comes stamped in the old rhythm, it's honored like law. Even his enemies tread carefully. When CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, attempts to push into Mayo's northern corridors in 2021, they're met not with war, but with vanishing allies. Port permissions disappear, trucks go missing, payments stall, and within 6 weeks, their forward movement halts. No firefight, just resistance in the form of friction, because Mayo doesn't push back with force. He dampens momentum, and the men trying to challenge him, they start to learn. There's no glory in outmaneuvering a man who already moved. He becomes an institution you negotiate with, not a target you chase. And meanwhile, civilians in the Sierra still speak of him not with fear, but reverence. They call him El Señor even now. They don't ask where he is. They ask what he would do. A woman at a rural clinic says her medicine shipment arrives every month, paid for anonymously. A school teacher receives a year's salary after a storm washes out the only bridge. A midwife in Kosala finds a new generator on her porch one morning, wrapped in plastic, with no note, and they all know who sent it. Many people still think this is reputation management, but in reality, it's insurance, not against law enforcement, but against history. Mayo wants to be remembered not as a monster, but as a man who balanced scales, who moved things forward, and in a strange way, he's succeeding. Because in a country plagued by violence, betrayal, and political neglect, his consistency starts to look like stability. So now, in 2021 and beyond, law enforcement strategies shift. They no longer say, find him. They say, contain the structure, because he may disappear, but his design will remain. And in that, he has already won, because legacy isn't built from guns. It's built from repetition without collapse. And El Mayo, he repeats, and never collapses. If you drive long enough through the highlands of Sinaloa, you might come to a crossroads with no name, no sign, no guard. Just a dusty turn where cell service disappears and the breeze carries that thin smell of pine and fuel. Nothing unusual, unless you know what to look for. An extra stone on the marker, a set of dog prints too fresh for dawn. Out there, past the reach of drones or dispatch radios, is where stories about El Mayo's last stronghold begin. But here's the twist. There may be no stronghold at all, because even after decades of search and surveillance, there's still no confirmed location, no satellite capture, no voice recording, just blurry anecdotes and whispered sightings from farmers too smart to talk twice. That's the final evolution of his strategy. Not disappearing, becoming myth. In many ways, El Mayo Zambada has transformed from a man into a ghost protocol, something that's activated rather than seen, an invisible infrastructure that others step into, inherit, maintain, but never fully command. And what does law enforcement have to show for it? Well, maps, theories, a few houses seized, some intercepted messages, enough to fill binders, not a cell, because each time a tip comes in, he's in Durango, he's near Tamazula, he's being treated in Hermosillo, and forces mobilize, there's always the same result, nothing. The coffee's warm, the dogs are fed, the blankets are folded, but the man is never there. Do you remember the night his son was arrested? That was supposed to be the moment it all unraveled, but nothing frayed. Because Mayo doesn't store weight in any single person, not even blood. That's the part that keeps analysts up at night. They can break a network, dismantle a route, freeze an account, but they can't freeze an idea. And Mayo, clever, patient, dangerous Mayo, has turned himself into just that. By 2022, rumors of his health intensify. Some claim he's near death, others that he's retired, that he's passed control to a secret council of elders, that he walks the hills alone, no guards, just memory for company. A few say he died already, years ago, and what remains is a puppet system using his name for cohesion. But when shipments arrive on time, when plazas stay calm, when routes clear without delay, the myth feels alive, because in cartel logic, death isn't real until operations stop. And Sinaloa's operations? Still flawless. Many people still think if he were dead, someone would step up, take the title, claim the seat. But no one does. Not out of fear, out of design. He trained them that way. He spent decades drilling into his inner circle. Never need me, just need the rhythm. So that if he were to vanish by choice or fate, the structure would keep humming. No announcement, no collapse. He built his absence like a relay baton. Even today, cartel insiders reference instructions from El Señor. Whether those instructions are current or historical almost doesn't matter. The words still carry weight. They're like commandments etched into the movement. One logistics officer in Nogales, arrested in 2022, when asked who authorized the shipment, shrugged and said, "The old man." That was enough. Even the DEA report wrote it plainly, presumed to refer to Ismael Zambada Garcia, though this remains unconfirmed, and unconfirmed is the keyword in every file that bears his name. No fingerprints, no confirmed photographs post-2000, no verifiable location, no direct communication, no arrest. He is a man erased in plain sight, like smoke in a locked room, and yet he's studied in every intelligence course on transnational crime. They break down his model like business students analyzing Warren Buffett. What would Mayo do? Has become a framework for decision-making in criminal enterprises and law enforcement alike. In 2023, a university in Bogota publishes a paper titled Leadership Without Presence, the Zambada Model. It compares Mayo to historical tacticians like Sun Tzu and European resistance leaders during World War II, because Mayo never fought with armies. He fought with absence, and absence is the hardest thing to track. There are moments, glimpses, that suggest he's still alive. A convoy seen too well coordinated, a decision made too swiftly, a bribe placed too precisely. None of these prove anything, but together, they feel like fingerprints pressed on silk, and every time someone says, "He's gone," a shipment lands safely in Chicago, or Perth, or Rome, because El Mayo may not control every movement now, but every movement still bows slightly in his direction. That's power, not the loud kind, not the kind that poses for photos with stacks of cash, the kind that just keeps functioning. And that's what terrifies people most. Not what he's done, but how long it's worked. A man who outlived the system designed to catch him, who scaled his empire without needing headlines, who remains, to this day, the only major narco never to be handcuffed. Not once, not for a photo, not for a ride-along, not for court. And every year that passes without his capture is no longer a fluke. It's a feature. It's the design working perfectly. Somewhere deep in the Sierra Madre Occidental, there's a road that doesn't appear on maps. It weaves through pine-shadowed ridges and past cattle fences, lashed together with wire older than some soldiers. It's quiet here, so quiet that even the birds seem to pause between chirps. And down that road, behind a metal gate that opens by rope and not by button, is a house, a small one, not grand, not armored, just brick, tin, and quiet patience. And maybe, just maybe, that's where El Mayo still wakes up. He might walk barefoot through the dirt, feeling the cold of dawn in his joints. He might sip weak coffee from a chipped mug. He might watch the smoke of morning fires lift into sky and disappear. Just like him. Or maybe he's not there. Maybe he's in Culiacan, tucked into a second-floor room above a bakery that smells like cinnamon and fresh dough. Maybe he's in Guatemala, posing as a retired farmer with bad knees and a better memory. Maybe he's gone, died a year ago, buried without a name, but the system still breathes because he made sure of that. He didn't teach his people how to follow him. He taught them how to follow function. That's the final trick. While others built pyramids with themselves at the top, easy to topple, he built a circular network. No center, just spokes, no hero, just habit. Do you remember the days when cartels fought for cameras? When brutality was currency? When names needed to echo for the brand to live? Mayo never played that game. He let the others crash against headlines and prison walls while he fine-tuned endurance. Many people still think the cartel world will shift dramatically when he's finally declared dead or captured. That there will be riots or collapse or fragmentation, but insiders know that moment already came and passed, because by the late 2020s, the machine no longer needs the man. It runs on rituals, codes, protocols, not charisma, not dominance, just logic refined by decades. That's why the DEA refers to Sinaloa not as a cartel, but as a transnational criminal enterprise. It behaves more like a multinational corporation than a gang. And in boardrooms thousands of miles from any jungle, analysts try to model it. They wonder how a fugitive in his 70s managed such longevity. They propose theories: distributed command architecture, fractured identity model, non-personality-based leadership. All accurate, but they miss the simplest answer. Mayo never let the spotlight poison him. He didn't need to be feared. He needed to be remembered correctly. Not as a kingpin, but as an operating principle. Like gravity, unseen, but always pulling. And now, that's how his legacy moves. Through street dealers in Phoenix who have no idea whose logistics keep their supply steady. Through port officials in Chiapas who only know the envelope always arrives on time. Through cousins of cousins of cousins who've never seen him but repeat his name like folklore. And even within his own family, there's ambiguity. His sons are scattered. Vicente arrested, Serafine detained and released, others rumored but unconfirmed. None command the empire. None need to. Because Mayo ensured that bloodline was never a requirement for influence. He built a system immune to ego, where stepping forward too loudly meant stepping into danger, where the best operators were the quietest. One former associate, arrested in 2023, said in a rare testimony, he never yelled. He'd just tilt his head. If you didn't understand, you weren't ready. That's mentorship in the Zambada method. Minimalism, mastered. It's why he lasted. And it's why even now, in government offices from Washington to Mexico City, there's always a section in every briefing. Zambada status presumed alive. Location unknown. Operational influence ongoing. No red line through the name. No retired stamp. Just a quiet, blinking cursor, waiting. Because unlike other fugitives, he's not wanted for what he might do. He's wanted for what he already built. A cartel that doesn't scream, doesn't flex, doesn't bleed headlines, just moves every week, every shipment, every dollar laundered through avocado exports and beauty salons and shell NGOs. And so the question now isn't where is he? The question is, will he be the last of his kind? Because the world is changing. The new generation favors attention over caution. They film busts. They live stream parties. They use memes as messages and wear designer logos like uniforms. But Mayo? He wears dust and memory, and a silence that reaches into rooms long after he's left. That's not fashion, that's legacy. Some legends end with gunfire, others with betrayal. But El Mayo's story? It drifts, like ash from a fire long put out, but still warm if you press your palm close enough. By 2024, the world around him has accelerated into chaos. Cartels fragment faster. Turf wars erupt between factions that used to dine together. Social media warfare, viral executions, territorial claims disguised as rap lyrics. Everything's louder, faster, bloodier. But through it all, Sinaloa's rhythm stays the same. That steady heartbeat? It's the sound of Zambada's shadow still cast across the blueprint. He doesn't need to correct anyone. The machine corrects itself, and that's the enduring proof of his genius. A structure so robust that it filters noise from signal automatically. Do you remember the first mule he sent north? The boy with boots too big and a fear too loud in his chest? That path, handcrafted, tested, revised, is still being used. Only now, the boy is a grandfather, and the mules carry data more than drugs, because even smuggling has evolved. Today, it's not always bales of cocaine or bricks of meth. Sometimes it's encrypted files, synthetic compounds, ghost chemicals processed in modular labs and sent by drone over desert borders. And still, his people control the lanes. They don't compete with violence. They outlast with consistency. Many people still think the younger generation will eventually eclipse his legacy. But the reality is, they operate within it. Even the Chapitos, with their loud aesthetics and urban flair, rely on corridors that Mayo mapped back when maps were still drawn by hand. They dress louder, drive flashier, party harder. But when they need silence, when they need efficiency, they defer to his style. It's become cartel scripture. If you need it done without noise, do it the Mayo way. And while most narcos are measured in body counts or seized assets, El Mayo is measured in what never breaks down. That port that's never shut. That customs officer who never needs reminding. That stash house that hasn't moved in a decade, but has never been raided. Each one a line in his quiet gospel. Even the agencies chasing him recognize it now. One mid-level intelligence officer recently told a journalist off record, "We don't expect to catch him. We just hope we understand him before he dies." And that death? Still unconfirmed. Every few months, the rumor mills spark again. He's sick. He's hiding in Argentina. He died last winter, buried in a canyon without a stone. But every time, a new shipment clears. A border checkpoint folds. A name is whispered in a coded message. Señor discretion. And that's enough, because in his world, presence is optional. But influence? Non-negotiable. So how do you trace a ghost? You don't. You pattern match the wake he leaves, and the wake continues, from Sinaloa to San Diego, from the hills of Chihuahua to the streets of London, from a fishing boat off Acapulco to a safe house in Antwerp. Every link in the chain still vibrates with his touch, and while his enemies fade, arrested, killed, turned, he endures, not by strength, not by loyalty, but by teaching fragility how to survive. That's his real art. Not smuggling, not empire, adaptation. Even now, if he's alive, he probably walks slower, talks less, maybe doesn't leave the room much. But the moment his name is spoken in the right tone, systems shift. A shipment is rerouted. A lieutenant pauses. A rival reconsiders, because his voice might not be heard, but its memory still commands silence. That's leadership few understand. And that's why, even in his absence, his playbook circulates like doctrine. Younger traffickers, some who've never seen him, not even in photos, still quote his methods like sacred text. Never trust the loudest one in the room. Distance is loyalty. Profit is louder than revenge. Disappear often, reappear only when no one expects it. That last one? That's the one that haunts, because just when you think he's gone, someone swears they saw him. A quiet man at a funeral, a silhouette by a roadside shrine, a cough behind a curtain. He's become a theory that watches back, and somewhere in the government archives, his file gets updated again. No arrest, no sighting, just an asterisk. Operational presence, suspected but unconfirmed. And with that, another week passes. Another ton moves. Another whisper gets carried on a breeze no satellite can trace. El Mayo Zambada, the ghost in the system, still not caught, still not heard, but somehow still running everything. By now, El Mayo is no longer just a figure from the drug war. He's something older, slower, deeper, like a current under the surface of a still lake. You don't see it, but the reeds bend slightly. The mud shifts when you're not looking. The silence has shape, and that shape is him. In 2025, some believe he has fully retired, that he passed the final relay to his most trusted inner circle. Men and women with no names in any files. People trained not to rise but to blend. Others believe he remains active, issuing brief approvals from some shaded porch at 8,000 feet above sea level. The coffee still bitter, the dogs still quiet, but most agree on this. He no longer needs to decide. He decided enough, because the machine now runs on its own memory, every gear taught by his pattern, every silence calibrated by his absence. And while others chase digital footprints, Mayo has become an analog legend in a binary world. Do you remember that joke they told in Culiacan? If the internet ever catches Mayo, it's because he mailed it a cassette tape. That's not just a punchline. That's doctrine. He rejected every lure of convenience that left others exposed. No selfies, no direct calls, no favors that couldn't be reversed. And now, the world struggles to even know what he wants. Many people still think that once a cartel boss reaches this level of myth, they go soft. They lose edge. They make mistakes. But Zambada's greatest move may be that he erased his edges. No hard lines, no bluster, just curves that deflect pressure. A style less like command, more like gravity. And gravity never argues, it pulls. Even the government, those in the know, quietly admit it. When the Sinaloa cartel outmaneuvers a federal operation, there's rarely outrage anymore. There's a shrug, a note in the margin. MZ method suspected. Just that. No one dares write more, because at this stage, to try and trap him is to chase a shadow cast by movement itself. His myth has become so potent that not acting is considered an act of obedience. A shipment delayed? They wait. A transfer rerouted? They don't question it, because somewhere someone once said, El Señor wouldn't move today. And that's enough. It's become cartel folklore. Young smugglers tell stories of how he once walked from Sonora to Chihuahua with only a flask and a map folded 6 times. Of how he made an army retreat with a single message passed through 3 children. Of how he cured a dying root by changing one truck's color. Whether true or not, doesn't matter. The myth works. And in criminal empires, myths with function become policy. So where does that leave us? In 2025, his face still doesn't show up on cameras. His name appears in less and less press. His sons are either locked up or silent. His rivals are mostly gone, deported, betrayed, decayed by their own appetite for noise. And still, product moves. Still, payments clear. Still, the borders breathe with his timing. And maybe that's his final gift to this world. A system that functions even in absence. A business model immune to vanity. A rhythm that doesn't need drums, just footsteps. Even law enforcement strategists have begun to quote his legacy in unlikely places. At a private conference in Brussels on transnational crime, a slide appears. The Zambada doctrine, power built on predictable invisibility. No one questions it, because the man who taught the world how to run a cartel without being seen is still teaching. Not by showing up, not by calling, just by being the memory of function done correctly. So now, his name floats in a kind of cultural twilight. A ghost among ghosts. A presence that's no longer questioned because it simply is. And those who still whisper about catching him, they're not chasing a man anymore. They're chasing a rhythm. And rhythms don't die. They just echo. It's night again in the Sierra. That same cool hush drapes over the hills like a woven blanket. And somewhere beyond the tree line, a light flickers once, then goes out. Maybe it was a lamp, maybe a cigarette, or maybe just a trick of the wind catching polished glass. But for those who believe, that flicker still means something, that he's still there. El Mayo Zambada, the last man standing from an age of ghosts. Not caught, not named, not declared dead, just waiting. But here's the thing, he's not waiting for anything. We are waiting for confirmation, for a name to be crossed out, for a death to be made official, for a headline to say, "The longest fugitive is gone." And yet, every morning that his absence doesn't break the system, we realize maybe we're chasing a conclusion that was never part of his story. Because for Zambada, exit was never escape. It was evolution. He didn't need a last stand. He needed a seamless vanishing. Do you remember the day the Dia said he may be dead? That wasn't an announcement. That was hope. A fragile hope that maybe the game was finally over. That the system built on his ghost might finally fray. But nothing frayed, because he built culture, not chaos. He whispered structure into a world that feeds on noise, and that structure still breathes. Many people still think every empire needs a throne, but Mayo dismantled his before it ever got warm. He never wanted to sit above. He wanted to be felt below, in the pause before a shipment leaves, in the nod a courier gives before driving 600 miles without a map, in the confidence of every middleman who doesn't panic when the phone goes quiet. That's legacy, and it's quiet. His name rarely appears now, not in reports, not in radio, not even in hushed cartel gossip. Because when a legend becomes infrastructure, the name fades while the effect remains. But in every backroom that functions too efficiently, in every shipment that clears too cleanly, in every network that hums without spotlight, he's there, not as a man, not even as a ghost, as method. And maybe that was the plan all along, because unlike the Chapos or Escobars, El Mayo didn't chase eternity through fame. He chased invisibility through precision. Even his final days, whether now or years ago, were likely lived the same way. Shoes by the door, a folded paper route map, a truck with no plates, a phone with no SIM, a dog that knows to wait until he finishes his coffee. Nothing grand, just rhythm, and the men who still quote his phrases, who still set their clocks to the routes he once walked. They don't do it for loyalty. They do it because it works, because he built a world where absence didn't mean failure. It meant design completed. And so, as the years pass and the world forgets the headlines, someone, somewhere, will still light a cigarette near a checkpoint, count the seconds and say, "Wait, the Senor would have done this different." And then they'll adjust. That's immortality. Not carved in stone, but folded into the process. El Mayo Zambada. Never caught, never crowned, but never wrong. And with that, the night closes over the hills again. Quiet. Steady. Exactly how he wanted it. So here we are, at the edge of the story and the edge of the map. Not every legend needs a gunshot. Not every ending has a door. Some just drift quietly into the folds of dusk, like a breath that lingers a moment longer before it fades. El Mayo's story may never have a last chapter. Maybe that was the point, because some men write their legacy in ink. Others, like him, write it in what's left behind. Routines, caution, and the silence between footsteps. As the sky deepens outside your window and the world softens its voice for sleep, know this: there's comfort in stories that don't end, in names that echo not for their volume, but for the way they refused to vanish completely. If you're still with me now, gently drifting somewhere between the hills of Sinaloa and the hush of your own quiet room, I hope tonight brought you a sense of calm, a slow exhale, a sense of distance from the noise, because that's what these stories are meant to do. Let the outside world fade. Let the clock take its time. Let your thoughts slow until they're just soft shapes in the dark. You're safe. You're still. The legend can keep moving without you. So rest easy now, and if silence ever feels too heavy, just remember, somewhere far from lights and headlines, a quiet man is still walking the high road.